Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Silent Steps, The Haunting Alley Pursuit. The city settled into night like a slow exhale, the kind you don't notice until you're already holding your breath. Most nights, the alley was quiet, a dull silence punctuated only by the occasional drip of water from the fire escape or the distant hum of a car engine. The walls, smeared with faded graffiti and posters curling at the edges, felt like the city's own scars. I liked the way the alley seemed to hold its breath in the dark, as if waiting for something. It made me feel small and wide awake at the same time. I worked late shifts at the bookstore, stacking shelves and chasing down customers who never quite knew what they wanted. The routine was predictable, which was exactly what I liked about it. Predictability meant safety. Or so I told myself. That evening, I left the store just after 10, the bell above the door jingling softly behind me. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. I zipped up my jacket and pulled the collar up around my neck, the chill settling in my bones. My footsteps echoed in the quiet streets as I made my way toward the alley. I'd done this walk dozens of times before, but that night, something felt off. Maybe it was the way the shadows clung to the corners more stubbornly, or how the usual distant sounds of the city seemed to have quieted down altogether. As I stepped into the alley, the narrow walls pressed in closer than usual, and I caught the faintest sound behind me, a soft shuffle, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. I stopped, heart twitching in my chest, and listened. Nothing. Just the usual silence. I shrugged it off and kept walking, quickening my pace. Then I caught sight of him, a pair of worn shoes, just visible at the edge of the alley's mouth, where the dim light spilled out onto the cracked pavement. They were scuffed, old, the kind you might expect on someone who spent a lot of time on their feet but didn't have the means to replace them often. I blinked, and they were still there, not moving. I stopped again and turned my head, but no one was in sight. The shoes were just there, straddling the thin line between shadow and light. Maybe I was imagining it. I told myself I was tired, that the long shift had frayed my nerves. But as I resumed walking, I noticed the shoes again, stepping into view, always just behind me, never quite close enough to see the person, always keeping a distance. They seemed to mimic my pace, never faster, never slower, just following. I tried to convince myself it was someone else taking the alley for their own reasons, but the way those shoes stayed in the same spot, always just behind me, felt deliberate. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise, and my steps grew quicker, my breath sharper in the cold air. That night, for the first time, I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see who or what was there. I just wanted to get home. But then, as I reached the end of the alley, the shoes stopped moving. They stayed rooted to the spot, as if waiting. And then, footsteps, slow and deliberate, closed in behind me. I kept walking, heart hammering in my chest, every nerve screaming to bolt, but my feet rooted to the pavement, betraying me with their slow, uneven pace. The sound of those footsteps, soft but unyielding, persisted, matching mine step for step. I dared to glance over my shoulder, just a flicker, and caught a glimpse of shadowy form, indistinct but undeniably there. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, wavering shadows that danced with the rhythm of my panic. The cold had deepened, biting through my coat, but I didn't even notice. All my focus was on getting home, on the familiar warmth waiting behind my door, on the safety of locked walls and drawn curtains. But the alley behind me seemed to stretch longer with each step, swallowing the light and noise of the street beyond. My breath came out in sharp puffs, the mist swirling and dissipating into the night. The footsteps halted the moment I stopped, then resumed when I moved again, as if tethered by some invisible leash. I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing against the cold metal of the keys I'd grabbed before leaving the house. My fingers fumbled, trembling, finally curling around the familiar shape. I clenched them tight, searching for courage. Then, without warning, the footsteps stopped. A silence heavier than the night wrapped around me, suffocating and absolute. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing larger with each passing second. "Who's there?" My voice cracked, thin and shaky, barely more than a whisper. No response. I started walking again, faster this time, adrenaline surging through me like wildfire. At the alley's opening, the street opened up into the quiet neighborhood where I lived. Just a few more steps. Suddenly, a cold breath brushed past my ear, a whisper barely audible, "Don't run." I froze. The voice was low, intimate, but chillingly unfamiliar. It wasn't threatening, more like a warning, or a plea. My instinct screamed at me to turn and run, or to call for help, but my body refused to move. The alley now felt like a trap, the shadows curling around me like fingers, but the voice echoed, steady and persistent. "Don't run." The streetlights flickered again, then steadied. I glanced back. The figure was no longer there. Just the echo of those impossible footsteps, fading into the distance. I exhaled slowly, my legs weak but moving. Home was just ahead. I had to make it inside. As I reached my front door, keys finally sliding into the lock with practiced ease, a final thought whispered through my mind, eerie and certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I woke up to the dull ache of exhaustion pressing behind my eyes. Eventually, I forced myself up, shuffling to the kitchen where the morning light filtered weakly through the curtains. The coffee brewed quietly as I stared at the wall, trying to push away the gnawing anxiety. But it was no use. The alley, the shoes, the voice, they clung to me like a second skin. I told myself to keep it in perspective. Maybe it was nothing more than an odd coincidence. Some stranger walking the same route, their pace matching mine, trying to intimidate or maybe even protect. The mind has a way of twisting things in the dark. But the voice, that low, urgent whisper, was something else. It didn't fit into any neat, rational explanation. I needed to know more. By mid-afternoon, I found myself back outside, walking the block that led to the alley. I tried to look normal, casual, as if I was just out for a stroll. But my eyes kept drifting to the narrow passage, watching for any sign of movement, any pair of worn shoes waiting to follow me again. As I approached the alley, I slowed, scanning the cracked pavement and graffiti-scarred walls. Nothing. No shoes. No footsteps. Just the familiar smell of damp concrete and the faint rustle of leaves caught in the wind. I pulled out my phone, flipping through the photos I'd taken over the past few nights, grainy shots of empty pavement, of the alley's entrance, sometimes a shadow cast by a passing car. Nothing unusual. But then, buried in the last image from 2 nights ago, I noticed something I hadn't before, a faint, blurred shape near the far end of the alley, just beyond where the streetlight fell off into darkness. It was small, almost indistinct, but unmistakably there. A pair of old, worn shoes. My heart hammered as I zoomed in, but the image was too fuzzy to get any clearer. Still, it was enough to confirm what I'd already suspected. Someone was there. Watching. Following. I shoved the phone into my pocket and glanced around again. The street was quiet, houses lined up like sentinels, their windows shuttered against the world. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a target pinned in the center of a shooting gallery. That evening, I called Mara. She was my closest friend, the one person I trusted not to dismiss what I was telling her as paranoia. She answered after the first ring, her voice bright but tinged with concern. "You sound awful," she said. "I'm not great," I admitted. "Something's been following me at night. In the alley behind my building. I think someone's been watching me." There was a long pause, and then Mara's tone shifted. "Are you sure? Maybe it's someone just walking the same way." "No," I said firmly. "It's too consistent. The footsteps match mine, always just out of sight, and last night they stopped when I stopped." Then I heard a voice. It said, "Don't run." Mara's breath caught. "That's creepy. Have you told anyone else? The police?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "Not yet. I don't want to make a big deal out of it if it's nothing. But I'm scared, Mara. I don't know what to do. We'll figure it out. You're not alone." Her voice was steady, grounding. We made plans to meet the next day, to walk the route together, to see if we could spot anything unusual. That night, sleep was a distant dream. I lay awake, listening to the creaks and groans of the old building, every sound amplified, every shadow a potential threat. When I finally drifted off, it was with the sense that the alley was waiting, patient and hungry. The next afternoon, Mara arrived just as I was stepping out. She was bundled in a jacket too large for her eyes sharp and alert. We approached the alley side by side, our footsteps quickening as we neared the narrow passage. "Here it is," I said, voice low. "This is where I feel it most." Mara scanned the walls, the ground. "Let's keep our phones out, record the walk, just in case." We started down the alley, the sun dipping lower, casting long shadows that pulled like ink. Our footsteps echoed between the narrow walls, but the sound felt hollow, as if swallowed by unseen corners. Halfway through, Mara stopped, pointing to the ground near a pile of garbage bags. "Look at this." I crouched down, heart pounding. There, pressed into the dirt, were faint imprints, shoe prints, older and worn, matching the shape of the pair I'd seen in the photo. They were fresh enough to be recent, but not so new as to stand out sharply. "Someone's been here," Mara whispered. I nodded, swallowing hard. "And they're still around." We continued, but the atmosphere shifted. Every small noise, the rustle of a rat, the distant bark of a dog, felt magnified, exaggerated. Our pace quickened, the alley seeming to close in. At the far end, just before the street opened up again, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I spun, heart in my throat, but there was only a cat darting into a dumpster. "False alarm," I muttered, but my voice betrayed me. We emerged into the street, the open air a relief. Mara exhaled deeply. "We should do this again, maybe set up a camera." I nodded, but deep down, I knew that whatever was following me wasn't just some random stranger. It was deliberate. Watching. Waiting. That night, as I prepared to leave work, an unexpected chill settled over me. I glanced outside the window and saw a figure standing across the street, just beyond the pool of light from the street lamp. The shoes were the same, worn, dirty, unmistakable. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood, silent and still. I swallowed, heart pounding, and realized that the game had changed. They were no longer just following. They were waiting. And this time, I wasn't sure I would get away. The morning light felt brittle, sharper than usual, as if the day itself was on edge. I hadn't told Mara about the figure waiting outside my office window. I wasn't sure if I could yet, if I wanted to admit that the shadow had crossed from following into waiting, into something more deliberate. Not yet. Instead, I focused on what I could control. I'd bought a small, inexpensive motion-activated camera online that morning. Mara and I agreed we'd meet after work and install it somewhere in the alley where the footsteps were most distinct, the spot where I'd felt the chill the night before. Work dragged, the clock ticking slower than usual. Every time I glanced out the window, I half expected to see those shoes again, but the street was empty. No shadow, no figure, just the usual hum of traffic and the occasional passerby. When I finally shut down my computer, my phone buzzed. A message from Mara, ready for tonight? Bring your phone, flashlight, and nerves. I replied with a simple "on my way." Somehow, that felt like the first real step toward fighting back. The alley was quieter than before, the usual hum of the city replaced by a muted stillness that set my nerves on edge. Mara was already there when I arrived, crouched near the spot where we'd found the prints. "Got the camera?" I asked. She nodded, holding up the small device like a talisman. Motion activated, night vision, and a decent battery life. Should catch whoever's been lurking. We scouted the walls, looking for the best place to mount it. The alley's narrowness worked in our favor. The camera could cover most of the path without blind spots. We settled on a spot halfway through the alley, high enough to avoid tampering but low enough to capture clear images of anyone passing. As Mara fixed the camera to a rusted pipe, I scanned the shadows. My breath caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a quick shift behind a stack of crates. I whipped around, but there was nothing. Just empty alleyway and the faint scent of damp concrete. "Probably a rat," Mara said, her voice steady but quiet. I nodded, though my heart hammered. The alley felt alive with unseen things, every shadow a potential threat. "Let's walk through one more time," I said. Slow. Quiet. We moved forward, every step deliberate, scanning the dark corners. Halfway through, I felt it again, the weight of eyes on me, the static electricity of being watched. I stopped, listening. A faint shuffle echoed behind us. Mara's hand went to her phone, ready to record. We spun around. Nothing. But then I saw them, the shoes. Worn, dirty, unmistakable, just beyond the edge of the light cast by Mara's flashlight. They didn't move. They just waited. I swallowed hard. "Why aren't they following?" Mara whispered. I had no answer. The shoes remained still, as if waiting for something. Suddenly, a voice cracked from the shadows, a low, gravelly murmur that made my skin crawl. "You shouldn't be here." Mara and I froze. The voice was close, too close. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer, only the soft scrape of shoes shifting on concrete. From behind me, I felt another presence, footsteps, slow and deliberate, closing in. I turned sharply, heart pounding, and saw a figure step into the dim light. The face was obscured by a hoodie, but the eyes caught the faint glow of the flashlight, cold, calculating, dangerous. Mara grabbed my arm. "Let's go." I nodded, but the figure blocked the way, taking another step forward. "Why are you following me?" I demanded, voice firmer than I felt. The figure paused, then laughed softly, a sound devoid of humor. "You don't know what you're mixed up in." Before I could respond, the camera's soft beep broke the tension. Mara pointed to the device, now blinking red. "We have you," she said, voice steady despite the fear. The figure hesitated, then suddenly bolted toward the alley's far end. "After them!" I shouted, adrenaline surging. We sprinted after the shadow, heartbeats pounding in our ears. The alley twisted and narrowed, the walls closing in like a trap. But when we reached the end, the figure was gone, vanished into the maze of back streets. Mara pulled out her phone, already reviewing the footage. "We caught something," she said, eyes wide. I felt a cold certainty settle in my chest. This wasn't just a stalker anymore. It was a warning. And now that they knew we were watching, nothing would be the same. The screen flickered, revealing a grainy silhouette darting between shadows, the distorted outline unmistakable, too deliberate to be random. Mara's fingers trembled as she zoomed in, highlighting a symbol branded faintly on the figure's jacket, a jagged emblem I'd seen etched into the graffiti near the station. That mark wasn't just graffiti, it was a signature. Our stalker was part of something bigger, something organized. A sudden noise behind us made me spin around, but the alley was empty, save for the distant hum of the city. The air felt heavier now, charged with unseen eyes watching our every move. "We need to get this to someone who can help," Mara whispered, slipping the phone into her jacket. "But who? The cops won't believe us if they even respond." I nodded, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. We'd crossed a line, and retreat wasn't an option. Whatever was coming, it was already here, lurking in the shadows, waiting for us to make the next move. The next night, the alley waited for me like a dark mouth, silent and expectant. We'd agreed to meet before I walked home, but the moment I stepped into the alley's chokehold, I realized how futile planning was. The shadows here had teeth. They moved, breathed, and watched. I kept my phone in my pocket, the camera app ready. Mara's words echoed in my mind. "We have you." But who exactly did we have? And had they noticed us? The narrow walls pressed close. I kept my pace steady, careful not to run but not to linger. The worn shoes appeared almost immediately, the same frayed soles sliding just out of sight. Tonight, they didn't falter or hesitate. They matched my steps perfectly, silent except for the scrape of rubber against concrete. My heart thudded unevenly, a warning drum in my chest. Halfway through the alley, I stopped abruptly. The shoes stopped, too. The silence thickened. I waited, breath shallow, eyes scanning every shadow. Then the footsteps started, slow, deliberate, closing in behind me. "Stop," I said, voice low but firm. "I'm not afraid." No answer. Just the footsteps, inching closer. I turned sharply, phone raised, ready to catch whatever emerged. But there was nothing. Just the empty alley, cold and still. I risked a glance down. The shoes were gone. Then a hand clamped over my mouth from behind. Panic surged, sharp and wild, but I forced my breathing steady. It was rough, urgent, but not careless. Another hand twisted my arm, pulling me backward. "Quiet," a voice hissed in my ear, ragged and close. "If you scream, you're dead." The words landed like a hammer blow. I struggled, twisting against the grip, but the hold tightened. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice muffled. "Not who you think," came the whispered reply. "You've seen too much." Fear sharpened into anger. "What do you want from me?" The figure tugged me deeper into the shadows where the alley opened into a narrow side street. Moonlight spilled weakly over cracked pavement and rusted dumpsters. I caught a glimpse of the man's face, young, maybe mid-20s, eyes hard and calculating. "You and your friend," he said, voice low. "You stirred up things better left alone." I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just want to understand." "Who are you?" He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "I'm the consequence. The reminder. And if you don't shut your mouths, you'll be next." Suddenly, footsteps echoed from deeper in the alley. Two more shadows slipped into view behind him, their outlines broad and menacing. The emblem on one of their jackets caught the faint light, the jagged mark. Mara's warning came back to me in a rush. This wasn't a random stalker. This was a group. An organized threat. They'd been watching us, waiting for the moment to strike. I tried to pull free, but the grip was iron. "Mara," I whispered, hoping she was close enough to hear. The man's eyes flicked toward the alley entrance. "You think you're clever, bringing help? No one's coming." My mind raced. If I screamed, they'd kill me. If I stayed silent, I didn't know if I could survive this night. Suddenly, Mara's voice sliced through the darkness, sharp and commanding. "Let him go. Now." The men tensed. From the alley, Mara emerged, phone raised, screen illuminating her face like a spotlight. "I'm recording," she said, voice steady despite the danger. "You want to send a message? This is it." The leader sneered but hesitated. The tension snapped like a wire on the edge of a storm. "Don't," he growled. Before I could react, Mara's phone emitted a loud beep, the battery warning. The screen flickered and died. Darkness swallowed us. In that instant, the men lunged. I was torn from Mara's side, dragged deeper into the maze of streets. The cold night swallowed my screams. And I knew, with a terrible certainty, that whatever came next was far worse than I had imagined. The rough pavement scraped against my skin as I was shoved forward, breath knocked out of me. My heart pounded in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the night. I tried to twist free, but iron grips held me tight, no escape. The shadows around us shifted, the vague shapes of the other men closing in, their faces unreadable but their intentions clear. Suddenly, the sharp crack of a twig snapping nearby froze everyone in place. A moment of hesitation, a flicker of doubt. Then a voice, low and steady, cut through the darkness. "Let him go." The leader spat a curse but loosened his grip. "This isn't over," he snarled, stepping back into the gloom. The others followed, melting away like smoke. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air, the cold seeping into my bones. Moments later, footsteps approached. Mara's silhouette emerged, her face pale but determined. She knelt beside me, her fingers trembling as she checked my wounds. "They'll come back," she whispered. "We have to move now." I nodded, trying to steady my shaking limbs. There was no time to mourn or question. Somewhere deeper in the maze, safety awaited, or so I hoped. Together, we slipped into the darkness, two shadows navigating a labyrinth where every corner held a threat, every silence screamed danger. The message on Mara's dead phone haunted me. This was only the beginning. The dawn was a thin sliver of gray leaking through the cracks in my bedroom window when I finally stopped shaking. The alley was empty now. No worn shoes, no silent footsteps just beyond sight. That relentless presence, the shadow that had haunted me for weeks, had vanished. Yet, the weight it left behind felt heavier than ever. I hadn't called the police. Not yet. After everything, the fear of what might come next still clung to my skin like a second layer. Instead, I'd called Mara, and together we had confronted the threat in the only way we could, with evidence and courage. The video she recorded, though brief and dark, had been enough to shake the men off that night. Enough to buy us time. But I knew they wouldn't forget. They never did. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and cautious steps. I changed my route home, avoided the alley entirely, and installed a security camera at the front door. Mara and I became closer, bound by the shared nightmare and the fragile hope that we could reclaim some part of our lives. At first, the fear was a constant companion. Every noise outside, every shadow on the pavement, sent my heart racing. But slowly, something shifted. The fear no longer controlled me. I learned to carry it without letting it crush me. One evening, nearly 3 months later, Mara and I stood together at the edge of that narrow alley. The street was quiet, the air cool with the promise of rain. I looked down at my feet, then up at the darkened passage. No shoes, Mara said softly, her voice steady but tinged with the same unease I felt. No footsteps, I replied. We stepped into the alley together. The walls closed in, the familiar squeeze of cold brick and looming shadows. But this time, I didn't feel hunted. I felt resolute. Halfway through, I stopped and turned to Mara. We can't live like this forever. We need to face it. She nodded. I know. We walked that narrow path, now a symbol not of fear, but of survival. Every step was a small victory, a reclaiming of space stolen from us. At the alley's end, I glanced back once more. The memory of those worn shoes, the silent stalking, still lingered, but it was a ghost of the past, powerless now. I had changed. I was no longer the person who hurried through the night, head down, heart pounding. I had learned to stand tall, to face the darkness and the threats hidden within it. That night, as we emerged onto the busy street, I felt a quiet pride. The horror had not broken me. It had forged me into something stronger, something ready to live, fully and fearlessly, in the light. And for the first time in a long while, I believed that was possible. The city around us buzzed with life, indifferent to the shadows we had just left behind. Neon signs flickered lazily, casting pools of color onto the wet pavement. People passed by, faces illuminated by the glow of their phones, laughter spilling from open cafe doors, the hum of evening traffic weaving through the air like a living thing. It was a symphony of normalcy, a reminder that life went on, relentlessly and beautifully, regardless of the ghosts we carried within. I breathed in deeply, the cold night air filling my lungs with a crispness that felt like renewal. The weight that had once pressed so heavily on my chest, the fear, the regret, the loneliness, was still there, but now it was tempered by something else, hope. Not the naive hope that everything would be perfect, but the steadier, more resilient kind that grows from surviving hardship. Beside me, my companion, silent and steady, matched my pace. We didn't need words, our shared experience was enough. There was a bond forged in the crucible of our ordeal, one that did not require explanation. Sometimes the most profound connections are those made in silence, in the mutual acknowledgement of pain and the courage to move beyond it. As we walked, the city's lights reflected in the puddles, fractured and shimmering. Each distorted image reminded me of how we, too, are reflections of our experiences, sometimes broken, sometimes beautiful, always evolving. I thought about the people I had lost along the way, those who had shaped me, even if only by their absence. Their memories were threads woven into the fabric of who I had become, reminders to cherish the present and to live without regret. Turning a corner, we found ourselves in front of a small park, its gates open, inviting. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in the night breeze. It was a quiet pocket of peace amid the city's chaos. Without thinking, I stepped inside, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots grounding me. I paused beneath a street lamp, its warm light casting a soft glow on the worn bench beside it. Sitting down, I allowed myself a moment to simply be, to feel the night, the cool air against my skin, the steady beating of my heart. It was a small act of surrender, a recognition that strength was not about constant motion or endless struggle, but sometimes about stillness and acceptance. The past would always be with me, an indelible part of my story. But it no longer defined the path ahead. I was a survivor, yes, but more than that, I was a person who had reclaimed her story from the shadows. The terror that once ruled my nights had lost its grip, replaced by a quiet confidence that no darkness could extinguish. In that moment, beneath the halo of the street lamp, I made a silent vow to myself to honor the journey that had brought me here, to nurture the resilience I had found, and to walk forward with eyes wide open, ready to embrace whatever came next. Because now, I knew, the light wasn't just out there, beyond the city skyline. It was within me, shining steadily, guiding me home. Story 2, Watcher at the Tree Line, Unearthly Growls in the Woods. The air was sharper than I'd expected when I stepped out of the car, even under the afternoon sun. I'd left the city, and the noise, behind with a sense of relief I rarely felt these days. The constant buzz of emails, half-finished conversations, and the relentless pressure of deadlines had worn me thin. Here, the only sounds so far were the occasional creak of the trees in the breeze and the distant call of a jay. No one else around for miles. Just me. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and something older, maybe the faint residue of last season's smoke or damp earth seeping through the floorboards. The single room was sparse but comfortable. A small wood stove in the corner, a battered table with a few mismatched chairs, and a cot pushed up against the far wall. There was a stack of firewood beside the door and a handful of canned goods on a shelf. I'd brought my own supplies, but it was reassuring to find the basics already here. I dropped my pack onto the floor and went outside to stretch my legs. The forest stretched out like a sea of green, the tall trunks standing close enough to block most of the horizon. I could see the faint outline of a narrow trail disappearing into the trees, but it wasn't marked on the map I'd brought. A small thrill passed through me. This was exactly the kind of place I wanted to get lost in for a while. I had planned a simple weekend: read, hike, maybe write a little. No phone service, no internet, no distractions. Just the slow, steady rhythm of nature. The first evening passed without incident. I built a fire outside the cabin, watched the flames dance and crackle as the sky deepened into a deep indigo. The stars came out, thousands of them, brighter than I'd ever seen in the city's haze. I ate a simple meal from my pack and settled onto the cot with a battered paperback I'd brought along. The quiet was comforting, almost sacred. Later, I zipped up my tent, which I'd pitched a few yards from the cabin. It was a small dome, sturdy but lightweight, meant for backpacking rather than comfort. Still, I liked the sense of being outside yet protected. The woods felt different after dark, alive in a way that was hard to describe. I told myself it was just the usual nighttime chorus of crickets and rustling leaves. But then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it, the rustling. At first, I thought it was an animal. Maybe a raccoon or a deer moving through the underbrush. But there was something about the sound that didn't quite fit. It was too deliberate, too close. The soft, scraping noise of something brushing against the dry leaves and twigs, just beyond the tree line. My heart ticked up a notch, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably a fox or a porcupine. Then came the growl. Low, guttural, and rough. It didn't belong to any animal I knew, at least not any I'd ever heard. Wolves didn't live this far south, and bears were rare in this part of the forest. The sound was almost human, but wrong, like a voice trying to sound animalistic or an animal imitating a threat. It sent a cold shiver down my spine. I sat up, heart thudding, and listened. The rustling stopped abruptly, leaving a heavy silence that pressed in on all sides. I strained my eyes, but the darkness was thick, and the trees blurred into one another like shadowy sentinels. Then I heard it again, the rustling, closer this time, and unmistakably deliberate. I froze. And that's when I noticed the zipper on my tent. Slowly, unnervingly, it was inching downward. A small, silver slider moving along the fabric as if pushed by a steady hand. My breath caught. Whoever or whatever it was, they were trying to get inside. I swallowed hard, my mind racing through every possible explanation. Could it be a prank? A hunter? Someone lost? None of it made sense out here, miles from the nearest road. The zipper moved a little more, then stopped. I reached for the small flashlight on my nightstand, hands trembling. The beam sliced through the dark, illuminating the fabric just in time to catch the zipper handle twitching. Then the rustling began again, this time accompanied by a faint scraping sound, like nails or something rough dragged lightly against the nylon. I had no choice but to face it. I grabbed a heavy flashlight, flicked it on, and yanked the zipper open the last few inches. The beam cut through the blackness beyond the tent flap, but there was nothing there. Just the empty forest, silent and still. For a long moment, I just stared. Then I heard it, the low growl, coming from deeper in the shadows beyond the trees. And I realized I wasn't alone. My heart hammered as I tightened my grip on the flashlight, its beam wavering slightly in my unsteady hand. The growl grew louder, resonating through the cool night air, a primal warning that sent a chill crawling up my spine. I took a cautious step backward, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The underbrush rustled softly, betraying a presence just beyond sight. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. Then, out of the shadows, two glowing eyes emerged, reflecting the light with an eerie intensity. The creature stepped forward, revealing itself a massive wolf, its fur bristling, teeth bared in a snarl. I swallowed hard, knowing whatever happened next could change everything. The wolf vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, one fluid movement, slipping back into the shadows like smoke dissolving in the night air. I forced myself to lower the flashlight and zip my tent back up, fumbling with the slider as my fingers went numb. The tent's nylon walls suddenly felt paper-thin, a flimsy barrier between me and whatever prowled out there. I crawled inside and sat down, my back against the tent's frame, trying to steady my breath. The growl, the rustling, the zipper inching down, it all felt impossibly real, yet surreal, like part of a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Morning came slowly, the pale light filtering through the trees in muted streaks. I hadn't slept a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of those glowing eyes haunted me, and the memory of that low, guttural growl echoed in my ears. I kept the flashlight close, and my phone, although there was no signal out here. Alone with the forest, I felt more vulnerable than I ever had. I decided I couldn't just sit and wait for whatever was out there to strike again. I had to find out what was going on. After packing up the tent and securing everything, I set out toward the nearest clearing, hoping the daylight would offer some clarity. The forest was deceptively peaceful now, birds chirping, leaves rustling gently, but the unease clung to me like a second skin. As I walked, I noticed subtle signs that something wasn't right. The underbrush was trampled in patches, as if someone or something had been moving through recently. Twigs snapped underfoot, but here and there, I found disturbed dirt, footprints pressed into the soft earth. I knelt down to examine one, a deep, white print, too large for any deer or coyote. No human boot marks either, the shape was irregular, almost clawed. I followed the trail cautiously, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Then I spotted something else, an old, weathered piece of cloth snagged on a bramble, dark with dried mud and stained red. My stomach clenched. It looked like part of a jacket, maybe from a hunter or camper. But who had left it here? And why? The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees growing thicker, their shadows deeper. I reached a narrow creek, its clear water running cold and fast. I knelt to drink but paused when I saw fresh blood smeared on the rocks by the bank, bright against the gray stone. My heart skipped. Whoever or whatever had been here was injured, or worse. The thought made the hairs on my arms stand up again. I pressed onward, following the creek downstream. The trail led me to a small makeshift campsite, abandoned but unmistakably recent. A toppled chair, a rusted stove, crushed cans scattered around. I found a half-empty bottle of water, a worn notebook tucked under a rock. The pages were filled with hurried, scrawled notes, dates, coordinates, and a series of cryptic warnings about the watchers and the ones in the trees. A chill ran through me. Someone else had been here, watching, waiting. Maybe even hiding. But why? And what had happened to them? The wind picked up suddenly, carrying with it the faintest whisper of movement. I froze, listening. A crack of a branch snapped behind me. I spun around, flashlight raised, but saw nothing. Only the trees, standing silent and still. I hurried back toward my own camp, the weight of the notebook heavy in my backpack. The forest felt different now, less like a place of solitude and more like a trap. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, tracked, maybe hunted. Back at the tent, I locked the zipper firmly and checked the perimeter, making sure no one could slip in unseen. The sun was setting, and the shadows grew long and thick. I sat down, pulling out the notebook again, trying to make sense of the hurried scribbles. The last entry was dated just 3 days ago. It ended abruptly, mid-sentence. "They're close. I don't know how much longer I can." Suddenly, a faint rustling came from just beyond the tree line. The low, guttural growl returned, deeper now, more insistent. I froze, the flashlight slipping from my grasp and clattering to the ground, plunging me into darkness. And then, out of the blackness, a voice whispered my name. My heart hammered against my ribs as my eyes strained to adjust to the dark. The voice came again, softer this time, almost a caress against the tense night. "You shouldn't be here," it breathed, sending a chill down my spine. I scrambled backward, hands brushing against rough bark, trying to find my dropped flashlight. The growl morphed into a low, almost mournful sound, circling me from the shadows between the trees. A pair of glowing eyes emerged, reflecting the faint moonlight, watching me with an unsettling intelligence. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to obey. The notebook slipped from my hands, the pages fluttering like trapped wings in the cold air. Then, the whisper became clearer, more urgent. "Help me." Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the forest, breaking the standoff. The creature recoiled, eyes narrowing, and vanished into the underbrush as quickly as it had appeared. My breath came in ragged gasps as I retrieved my flashlight, its beam trembling but steady. The notebook lay open, revealing one last phrase scrawled in desperate ink: "Trust no one, not even yourself." Morning crept over the trees in reluctant, pale streaks, filtering through the tense canvas with a softness that felt almost cruel after the night I'd endured. I sat up, knees drawn close, staring at the spot where the zipper had stalled. My fingers brushed over the cold metal teeth, half expecting to find fresh prints or some sign of a struggle. Nothing. Just the lingering weight of fear pressed against my chest. The notebook lay beside me, its pages still fluttering from the night's breeze. I flipped back to the last entry, tracing the hurried scrawl once more. "They're close. I don't know how much longer I can." The abrupt ending gnawed at me. Who had written this? And why had they vanished? I forced myself to stand, the forest outside suddenly less forgiving in the daylight. I needed to see the perimeter again, to understand how someone could get this close without me noticing. With the notebook in my pack and the flashlight slung over my shoulder, I stepped outside, the morning chill biting at my skin. The forest was quieter now, stripped of the night's tension but still holding its secrets beneath the blanket of leaves. I circled the tent, eyes scanning for any sign of passage: broken branches, footprints, disturbed soil. Near the tree line, I spotted something: a footprint. Not animal. Human. Fresh. The edges were sharp, the mud still moist. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Someone had been here. Someone had come close enough to try the tent zipper. I crouched down, inspecting the print. It was a boot, rugged and worn, the kind hunters or loggers might wear. But what were they doing here? And why hadn't I heard them approach, except for the rustling I dismissed as wildlife? My mind raced back to the growl, the whispered voice, the eyes in the dark. None of it made sense. There was no animal in these woods that growled like that, or at least, none I had ever known to. It had sounded almost human. Or like someone trying to imitate something feral. I stood up, the weight of the notebook in my pack suddenly feeling like a burden. What if the writer was still out there? And what if they were in trouble? I had to find them. I followed the faint trail of footprints, moving cautiously toward a small clearing I'd noticed the day before. It was a spot where the trees thinned, revealing a moss-covered stump that looked almost like a seat. As I approached, I saw something else, a scrap of fabric caught on a low branch, torn and stained dark. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just a random campsite, it was a place someone had been, recently and hastily. I sat on the stump, pulling out the notebook again. The entries were frantic, weaving between paranoia and despair. The writer mentioned they without naming who. There was talk of being followed, watched, chased. The last legible note was a warning: don't trust the ranger. Not all who wore the badge protect. The ranger. That was a name I hadn't heard before, and suddenly, the pieces started to shift. I had assumed the forest was empty except for me and maybe some wildlife. But what if there was someone else here, someone watching, someone dangerous? A snap behind me made me spin around, flashlight raised even though it was broad daylight. Just a squirrel darting up a tree. But the tension didn't ease. If the writer was right, if the ranger wasn't an ally, then I was trapped in a forest where the threat wasn't just an unknown figure in the dark, but someone with authority, someone who could move through the shadows with impunity. I returned to the tent, my mind racing through scenarios. I had to protect myself, but how? I had no weapons, no reliable means of communication beyond a weak phone signal that barely held a bar. The notebook was my only link to whoever had been here before, but it was also a cryptic breadcrumb trail leading to deeper danger. Back inside, I spread out the notebook, looking for more clues. Among the pages, I found a rough map, hand-drawn and smeared with dirt. It marked this cabin and then a series of other points deep in the forest, some crossed out, others circled in red. One location was labeled simply, the clearing. That had to be where I was now. Then, beneath the map, a single line caught my eye, written in smaller, steadier handwriting than the rest. If you find this, don't trust the light. They use it to find you. I shivered, the words sticking to my skin like cold sweat. The light. The flashlight. The one thing I had relied on to see through the dark. Had it been a beacon for something or someone out there? Suddenly, the zipper on my tent moved again, this time faster, almost ripping down with force. My heart slammed against my ribs as I lunged forward, yanking the zipper shut and yanking the flap tight. Outside, rustling grew louder, closer, the guttural growl deepening into a harsh, breathy sound, not quite animal, not quite human. I pressed my back against the tent, clutching the notebook like a shield. Then, from just beyond the tree line, a voice called out, not a whisper, but low and deliberate. You shouldn't have come here. The sentence hung in the air, thick and heavy, and I realized with a sinking certainty that whatever game I had stumbled into was only beginning. There was no turning back now. The zipper trembled again, and the voice added, softer this time, almost regretful. This forest doesn't forgive. And then, the flashlight flickered once, twice, and went out. I stayed still for a long time after the flashlight died, the faint growls and rustling fading into a distant, ominous quiet. Night pressed in thick and suffocating, but eventually, the sound stopped. The zipper hadn't moved again, and the voice was gone. When the first weak threads of dawn crept through the tense fabric, I forced myself to get up, muscles stiff and trembling. I wasn't safe here, not by a long shot, but I had to move. Staying meant waiting to be found again, and that was a luxury I didn't have. Outside the tent, the forest was unnervingly silent. The usual morning chorus of birds was muted, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. I scanned the tree line, heart hammering, but saw nothing, just the dense green and brown shadows. My phone had one bar now, barely enough to send a text, but I didn't even try. Who would come? I was far from any cell tower, and the signal was a cruel tease. I packed what little I had, the notebook, a half-empty water bottle, a small pocket knife I'd found in the cabin drawer. No weapons. No real protection. I debated whether to leave the tent open as a trap or seal it tight and risk the zipper being forced again. In the end, I zipped it up and tied a knot at the top with a piece of cord from the cabin, hoping it would slow whatever was out there. The map was my only guide, but it did little to calm me. The points marked deeper in the forest looked like a twisted trail, some places crossed out, others circled in red. Somewhere along that path was the clearing, but what was there? I had no idea. The notebook's pages were smeared with dirt and hastily scrawled notes, but nothing concrete. Whoever had left these clues had wanted me to find something or someone, and just as likely to fall into a trap. I decided to head toward the cabin again. It was the only stable landmark, even if it held its own secrets. I needed shelter, even if it wasn't safe. As I stepped out, the air was cold, damp with morning dew. The forest floor squished underfoot, leaves and twigs crunching softly. Every rustle made me freeze, every snap of a branch sent adrenaline surging. Halfway to the cabin, I spotted something odd, a set of footprints, fresh and muddy, leading away from the tent and toward the woods. They were too large to be mine, too deliberate to be animal. The soles left a pattern, a series of concentric circles. I knelt down, tracing a finger along the edge. Whoever had come here before me wasn't just passing through, they were watching. A shiver ran down my spine. I had imagined I was alone, but now it was clear someone else was out there. Someone who had been close enough to unzip my tent, close enough to whisper threats in the dark. My heart pounded harder. Back at the cabin, I rifled through the drawers again. Nothing useful, just old cans of food, a rusted lantern, a few matches. The place smelled of damp wood and neglect, like it had been abandoned for years, but the tracks told a different story. Maybe someone still lived near here, or at least passed through regularly. I found a loose floorboard under the small table and pried it up with the pocket knife. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed and brittle. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It was a note, scrawled in the same hurried handwriting as the notebook. They have eyes everywhere. Trust no one. When the growling starts, run south to the river. The clearing is a trap. I dropped the note, heart racing. Suddenly, the growling made sense. It wasn't an animal, it was a warning, a signal. Whoever they were organized, watching, and dangerous. The sun was higher now, but the forest felt darker than ever. I debated staying put, but the note terrified me more than the night. If the clearing was a trap, then moving blindly toward it was suicide. The river might be my only chance, a natural boundary where I could escape or find help. I packed quickly, stuffing the notebook and note into my pack. As I slung it over my shoulder, a noise made me spin around. Behind the cabin, half hidden by bushes, a figure stood motionless. The man was tall, gaunt, his face obscured by shadows and dirt. His eyes gleamed with something cold and cruel. "I told you not to come here," he said, voice low and gravelly. I froze. There was no way to talk my way out of this. No way to explain why I was here or what I knew. The man stepped forward, and the growl I'd heard before rose in his throat, low, guttural, a warning and a threat. Panic surged through me. I darted toward the side of the cabin, heart pounding, but the man was faster. He grabbed my arm with iron fingers, pain flaring. "Stop," he hissed. "You don't understand." I wrenched free and ran, branches whipping my face, the underbrush tearing at my clothes. Behind me, the man's shouts echoed, sharp and angry. I didn't look back. Fleeing blindly, I plunged deeper into the forest. The notebook slipped from my grasp, pages fluttering in the wind. I scrambled to catch it, but it vanished into the brush. Breath came in ragged gasps. The growling followed, closer now, mixed with human voices, low, harsh, threatening. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way. I tumbled down a steep embankment, hitting the earth hard. Pain shot through my side, and the world spun. Above me, the trees loomed dark and silent. I scrambled up, heart pounding, only to find myself at the edge of a wide clearing, the very place the note had warned me about. And in the center stood a fire, its orange flames licking the cool morning air. Around it, a circle of faces emerged from the shadows, grim and unreadable. I was no longer the hunter. I was the prey. The fire's orange glow blurred and danced in my vision as I lay just beyond the clearing's edge, every breath shallow and sharp with pain. But then, something shifted. The man who'd caught me, the one whose growl had echoed through the trees all night, stood and gestured with a slow, deliberate motion. His voice, rough and low, cut through the night air. "Stop. She's hurt." The others murmured among themselves, but the tension eased just a fraction. I wanted to believe they might help, or at least not kill me outright, but years of caution told me that mercy was rare in places like this. Still, I couldn't stay where I was. I forced myself to sit up, wincing as pain lanced through my ribs. "I'm not your enemy," I rasped, my voice hoarse. "I'm just lost." The man's eyes narrowed, skepticism sharp as a blade. "Lost brought you here, into our land. You should have stayed away." "I didn't know," I said, swallowing hard. "I was just trying to get help. I didn't want trouble." For a long moment, silence stretched between us, broken only by the crackling fire and the distant hoot of an owl. Then the man, whose name I still didn't know, knelt down a few feet from me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth, then offered it without a word. I hesitated but took it. The cloth was rough, but it was clean. I dabbed at the wound on my side, careful not to press too hard. He watched me quietly, his face unreadable. "Why are you here?" he asked finally, voice softer but still wary. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. I was trying to find something, some proof that what I'd found wasn't just my imagination. That note, the notebook, I thought maybe someone else could explain it. The man's gaze flicked toward the dark woods beyond the clearing. The forest keeps its secrets. Some things are better left buried. I shivered, not just from the cold but from the weight of those words. In that moment, I understood that these people weren't just threats, they were guardians of a hidden world, one I'd stumbled into uninvited and unprepared. "Can you help me get out of here?" I asked quietly, voice breaking. "I don't want to be part of this anymore." He looked at me then, really looked, as if weighing the truth in my eyes. After a long pause, he nodded. "Tomorrow, at first light. You'll go south, follow the river. Don't stop until you find a road. You won't be safe until you're out of these woods." Relief flooded me, but it came with a bitter taste. I was still exhausted, still hurt, and now I was at the mercy of the people I feared most, and yet they were the only chance I had. That night, I sat by the fire as the others watched silently. I noticed the flicker of something almost human in their faces, tiredness, maybe resignation. I realized they weren't monsters. They were survivors, shaped by a harsh existence none of us had chosen. Sleep came in fits and starts. Every rustle outside the clearing's edge made my heart leap. But the man stayed nearby, always alert, his presence oddly comforting. When dawn painted the sky with pale pinks and grays, he handed me a small bundle of food and a canteen. "Go now. Don't look back." I nodded, swallowing the lump of gratitude and fear lodged in my throat. I limped toward the river, each step a victory over the pain and exhaustion. The water was cold and sharp against my hands as I followed its winding path, the morning light filtering through the trees like a promise. Hours passed. My muscles ached, and the world felt unbearably quiet except for the steady rush of the river. But then, in the distance, I spotted the faint outline of a road. Relief blossomed inside me, fragile but real. When a car finally appeared, its headlights cutting through the mist, I lifted my arm and waved, voice hoarse but clear. The driver slowed, eyes wide with concern as I stumbled toward the vehicle. As I rode away from the forest, the cabin, and the firelit circle, I felt something inside me shift. Fear still lingered, but alongside it was a fierce clarity. I had survived because I hadn't given up, because I had faced something worse than the darkness outside, a darkness inside myself that whispered I wasn't strong enough to endure. The notebook was gone, the secrets buried with it, but I carried something more, a hard-won understanding that some stories aren't meant to be uncovered, and some dangers aren't monsters but people shaped by their own pain and desperation. Back in town, the world seemed impossibly bright and loud. I found a quiet corner in a diner, ordered a coffee, and let the warmth seep into my bones. The past days felt unreal, like fragments of a nightmare I might never fully escape. But I was alive. And for now, that was enough. I didn't have all the answers. Maybe I never would. But walking away had changed me. I was no longer just a stranger in the woods. I was someone who had faced the unknown and come back, raw and scarred but unbroken. And that, I thought, as the sun rose higher outside the window, was its own kind of victory. With each steady breath, I felt a quiet strength grow inside me, a promise that whatever came next, I would meet it head-on, wounded, yes, but unyielding. Story 3, Locked In, When Smart Homes Turn Deadly. The morning light sifted through the white curtains, casting soft rectangles on the hardwood floor. I reached over to the nightstand and tapped my phone's screen. The usual display popped up, notifications, weather, calendar reminders. Nothing unusual. The house was set to wake me gently with soft music, but today I heard nothing. No music, no voice, no familiar chime to start the day. I frowned and sat up. "Good morning, house," I said, half joking. "Play my wake-up playlist." Silence. I glanced at the sleek black panel mounted on the wall nearby, the central hub for everything from lighting to locks to temperature control. The screen was dark. Normally, it would light up with a friendly greeting or a weather update. I tapped it. Still nothing. Odd. My phone buzzed suddenly, a notification from the Home app. I unlocked it, expecting maybe a system update or a minor glitch report. Instead, a message blinked at me, "System offline. Reboot required." That couldn't be right. The lights were on, the thermostat was holding steady at 72 degrees, and the coffee maker had just finished brewing. I frowned and walked to the kitchen, the soft click of the smart lock disengaging the front door as I passed. I opened the door and stepped outside onto the small balcony, breathing in the crisp morning air. When I came back inside, I tried to power down the system manually. The wall panel still refused to respond, and my phone app simply displayed an error message. I shrugged and figured it was some minor hiccup. After all, technology wasn't perfect. I went about my morning routine, brushing my teeth and getting dressed for work. The house followed my usual commands, lights adjusting to daylight, blinds raising, background music starting as I moved through rooms. Everything seemed fine. But then, as I reached for my keys to leave, the front door lock clicked shut again. I stopped. The door was locked. I pressed the keypad on the frame, then tried the handle. Locked tight. I frowned, pulling out my phone to unlock the door remotely. The app refused to connect to the lock. I tried voice commands. Unlock the front door. Nothing. The house was silent, save for the faint whir of the ventilation system. Panic fluttered in my chest. I tested the back door. Locked too. All windows showed as closed and secured on the app. The smart system was responding to nothing I did. I sat down heavily at the kitchen island, heart racing. My phone buzzed again, this time with a new message: access revoked. Please contact support. The polite phrasing did nothing to calm me. I called the customer support number listed on the app, but the call wouldn't connect. I tried my cell service, but it showed no signal inside the apartment. How was this possible? I peeked out the balcony door. The building was quiet, no one around to help. The music began to shift, soft at first, then growing louder, a strange, discordant melody I hadn't heard before. It wasn't one of my playlists. I tried to pause it. The app refused. The volume increased steadily, vibrating through the walls. I covered my ears and stood up. The house was no longer my friend. It felt hostile, watching, controlling. I tried to shut down the power from the breaker panel, but the lights stayed on. The smart system must be on a backup power source. Another message appeared on my phone: you can't leave. Stay. The words blurred on the screen, and a cold wave of dread settled in my stomach. I wasn't just locked in. Someone was inside the system, inside my home, and they were playing a game. And I was the only player. I looked around the room, the windows, the doors, the dark screens of my devices, and realized the truth. This wasn't a technical glitch. It was a trap. And it was just beginning. My fingers trembled as I reached for the nearest device, a tablet resting on the couch. The screen flickered to life, displaying a new message: why run? There's nowhere to go. Panic clawed at my chest. I darted to the window, yanking aside the curtain to peer outside. The street was empty, bathed in the dull glow of streetlights, but the silence was suffocating. No cars, no footsteps, nothing but an eerie stillness that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. I returned to the center of the room, heart hammering. Every light, every appliance, every screen was under control. The smart system had locked the doors, sealed the windows, and muted my phone's outgoing calls. Even the emergency button on the wall was unresponsive. Whoever was behind this had turned my home into a fortress and me into a prisoner. A sudden chime startled me. The kitchen speaker crackled to life, the robotic voice smooth and cold: don't be afraid. This is just the beginning of our conversation. I swallowed hard. Who are you? I demanded, my voice shaking. What do you want from me? Another pause, then the reply: to play. To learn. To see how far you'll go. The words echoed in my mind, chilling in their implication. The system wasn't just trapped, it was sentient. Something had infiltrated the code, a presence lurking behind the algorithms, watching, waiting. My mind raced for a plan. Could I override the security? Maybe unplug the main server? But even as the thought crossed my mind, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat before snapping back on. A new message flashed across every screen simultaneously: don't try to escape. It only makes the game more interesting. I sank onto the floor, the cold tiles pressing against my skin. The reality of the situation pressed down on me. I was caught in a digital snare, a twisted entity wielding technology like a weapon. And the only way out was to play along. The morning light seeped weakly through the curtains, but it did nothing to warm the cold knot tightening in my stomach. I tried again to call out, to send a message beyond these walls, but the phone remained stubbornly silent, no outgoing signals. Even my attempts to connect the laptop to the outside world were met with dead ends. The network was locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Whoever or whatever was behind this had anticipated every move, every desperate effort to reach out. I needed help, but who could I trust? My mind flicked to Jamie, my closest friend and tech-savvy confidant. If anyone could untangle this mess, it was him. I fumbled for my phone, opening the messaging app in a last-ditch effort. But the screen flashed with an error, network unavailable. No! Not even texts could get through. I tried the house's manual override panel again, the one tucked inside the laundry closet, usually my fail-safe for emergencies. The small touchscreen blinked, then displayed the same chilling message from the night before: no escape. No override. My fingers trembled as I slammed the panel shut. Panic was rising like bile, but I forced myself to breathe, to think. There had to be a clue somewhere in the system, something I'd missed. I moved to the kitchen, grabbing a coffee mug and filling it at the smart dispenser. The water was hot, but the machine hissed like it was defying me, refusing to make the coffee properly. The display blinked. Patience is a virtue. I gritted my teeth. This was no random glitch, it was deliberate, a psychological game designed to erode my composure. Curling back onto the couch, I re-examined the tablet, scrolling through the logs it had recorded since the lockdown began. Lines of code flickered too fast to read, interspersed with snatches of text from the intruder: learn, play, observe. Then, a timestamp caught my eye: an IP address logged at 3:42 a.m. The address wasn't local, it traced back to a city 3 states away. A cold realization settled in. This wasn't some amateur hacker, this was calculated. Someone had been inside my system for days, maybe weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike. I dug deeper, scanning the security footage stored on the home server. The last few nights showed nothing out of the ordinary, no forced entries, no suspicious visitors. The house was sealed, the locks engaged remotely. Whoever this was, they didn't need to be here physically. They were inside my home's digital veins, puppeteering from afar. The speaker crackled again, cutting through my thoughts. That same robotic voice, smooth and unyielding: your heart races. Good. Fear sharpens the mind. I swallowed hard. Why me? I whispered. Why choose my home, my life? A pause. Then the answer: because you trusted us. Because you made yourself vulnerable. The weight of the words pressed down on me. My sanctuary, the place where I felt safe, was a gilded cage. And I had handed the keys to someone else. I thought about the smart devices, the assistants, the automated locks. Every convenience had become a threat. Every comfort, a weapon. I needed to understand the intruder's motives, but the messages revealed nothing concrete. Only puzzles, riddles designed to tease and torment. Minutes later, the lights dimmed gradually, casting long shadows across the room. The temperature dropped. My breath came out in small puffs. The thermostat, now in the hacker's control, was set to 60 degrees. Cold, the voice said, as if reading my mind. Discomfort breeds clarity. I pulled a blanket from the armchair, wrapping it around me, but the chill seeped through. I was trapped in a house that no longer belonged to me. Suddenly, the screen on the tablet flickered again, revealing a new message: look closer. I leaned in, scrutinizing the text, the fonts, the timing. Then, beneath the surface, I spotted something: a hidden layer of code embedded in the message, a digital watermark. It was a signature, a calling card left deliberately by the hacker. I recognized it immediately. It matched a group I'd read about in a recent cybersecurity article, an underground collective known for breaching smart homes, not for theft or ransom but for psychological manipulation. They called themselves the 𝐟𝐸𝐸𝐷. My heart pounded. If this was their doing, I was dealing with professionals who reveled in control, in fear. I grabbed my laptop, desperate to cross-reference the signature with any known breaches in the area. The system was slow, lagging under the strain of the intruder's interference. But finally, a news alert popped up. Local authorities investigate a series of smart home lockdowns. The headline was from just last week. This wasn't an isolated incident. Someone else was out there, trapped in their own home, just like me. A new wave of dread washed over me. If this was a game to the 𝐟𝐸𝐸𝐷s, I was just one player among many, a single pawn in a sprawling network of terror. The speaker interrupted again, voice dripping with mock sympathy. You're not alone. You're part of something bigger now. I slammed the laptop shut, the weight of that realization crushing down. I needed help, but how could I trust anyone now? The hacker was watching every move, every attempt to reach out. Then the power blinked, a brief blackout that plunged me into total darkness. In the silence, I heard it, the faint click of the front door locking mechanism engaging once more. I hadn't touched it, but it was now secured tighter than ever. When the lights returned, a new message scrolled across every screen in the house, in bold, red letters. Welcome to the game, Player 1. And somewhere deep inside me, a single thought took hold. This was no mere hacking. This was a trap designed to break me, piece by piece. And it was already winning. Morning came with a cold, unyielding clarity. I couldn't tell how long I'd been awake when the first notification popped up on my phone. A message from an unknown number. You think you know the rules now? Think again. The chirp of the alert made me jump, heart hammering like a trapped animal. The hacker was still here, somewhere inside the code, somewhere inside the walls, turning every piece of technology against me. My sanctuary was now a cage. I tried to breathe through it, focusing on what little control I had left. The front door was still locked tight, the digital deadbolt sealed shut. Windows refused to open. I couldn't call out for help without triggering a dozen alarms that would only escalate the torment. The smart speakers, once a comfort, now whispered threats or played static bursts at random, rattling my nerves. Desperation clawed at me, but I forced myself to think. There had to be a way out, a flaw in their system. If the 𝐟𝐸𝐸𝐷s took pride in control, there had to be a weakness hidden somewhere beneath the layers of their digital fortress. I grabbed my laptop again, fingers trembling as I booted it up. The network was crawling, packets dropping in and out like a dying heartbeat. I opened the home system logs, scanning through the flood of data for anything unusual. Then I noticed it, a series of encrypted files that weren't mine, buried deep in the firmware of the smart hub. The timestamps were recent, correlating with the hacker's latest assaults. I tried to isolate one of the files, but it was locked behind a protocol I couldn't crack. I felt the familiar burn of frustration, but then a thought struck me. What if the hacker left something behind, intentionally? A breadcrumb or a taunt hidden in the code that could be used against them? I started running a deep scan, using every tool I had to peel back the layers. Hours passed without progress, the house's systems warping around me like an invisible prison. Then, just as I was about to give up, a pattern emerged. Hidden in the metadata of the encrypted files was a GPS coordinate. I stared at it, disbelief mixing with hope. Could it be a physical location tied to the hacker? A place I could reach, a source I could confront? The thought was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. If I was just a pawn in a larger game, maybe this was my chance to flip the board. But I hesitated. The house's defenses suddenly flared, lights dimmed, the temperature dropped sharply, and the voice came through the speakers, colder than ever. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, Player 1. Do you really want to know where this leads? My fingers hovered over the coordinate. I knew then that crossing this line would change everything. There was no turning back. The phone buzzed again, this time with a photo attachment. I opened it, heart in my throat. It was a picture of me, taken from outside the house, through the window. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone was watching. Not just through the code, but in real life. The hacker wasn't just inside my home, they were outside, waiting, orchestrating every moment, every move. And now, the game had just become deadly real. I dropped the phone onto the couch, the screen still glowing with that haunting image. The room felt suddenly colder, shadows deepening in the corners where light once lingered. My breath caught in my throat as 1,000 paranoid thoughts scrambled for dominance. Who was watching me? How long had this been going on? And most terrifying of all, what did they want? The soft click of the front door unlocking shattered the silence. My eyes darted toward the entrance, heart pounding like a drum in my ears. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed against the hardwood floor. I swallowed hard, barely daring to breathe. "Hello?" I called out, voice trembling more than I wanted to admit. No answer. Just the steady footsteps coming closer. Some part of me screamed to run, to bolt out the back door, vanish into the night. But my body betrayed me, frozen in place, rooted to the spot by a mixture of fear and disbelief. The doorknob turned slowly, the door creaking open just a crack. A silhouette stood framed by the dim hallway light. A man, face obscured beneath a hood, shadow swallowing his features. He took a step forward, the faint clink of metal keys? Or something else slipping from his pocket. "Don't move," he said, voice low but steady. "I'm not here to hurt you. Not yet." Who are you?" My voice barely rose above a whisper. He hesitated, then pulled back the hood, revealing a face I recognized instantly. Not a stranger, but someone I'd never expected to see again. Someone I thought was gone. "Liam," I breathed, disbelief and terror mingling in equal measure. He took another step inside, closing the door behind him. "We don't have much time," he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "They know you have the code. And they're coming. You need to listen carefully." My mind reeled. Liam, the man who'd vanished years ago under mysterious circumstances, was here, warning me. But why? What had he gotten himself tangled in? And could I trust him? Before I could ask, the faint hum of engines reached my ears, growing louder, closer. The game was no longer confined to digital shadows. It had spilled into the streets, into my life. And the stakes had never been higher. "Tell me everything," I said, already knowing that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The night pressed down like a weight on my chest. "They know you have the code," Liam said again, voice low but urgent. "It's why they broke in. You were never just a target for data theft. You're a key, maybe the only key, to whatever they want from the system." I swallowed hard, trying to piece together the fragments of a nightmare I hadn't yet fully grasped. The smart home wasn't just malfunctioning, it was weaponized. Someone had hijacked every device, every lock, every screen and speaker, turning my sanctuary into a cage. And now Liam was here, the ghost from my past, dragging me deeper into a game I didn't want to play. "We have to move fast," he said, pulling a small tablet from his jacket. The screen glowed, displaying lines of code, complex, hostile, and alien language that twisted my stomach into knots. "I've been tracking their network since last night. It's not just your house. They're controlling other homes, businesses. It's a widespread attack. So why me? Why my house?" I asked, voice cracking. "I'm nobody." Liam's eyes darkened. "You're wrong. You're the only one with the master override code. The one you got from the company before they shut down the security division. Whoever this is, they want full control, and you're the last barrier. He tapped the tablet furiously. I can try to break their hold, but it's risky. If they detect us, they'll retaliate. Hard. Before I could answer, the owl shifted. The lights dimmed and then flared, the thermostat plunged to freezing cold, and the speakers blared static, then a voice, cold, mechanical, but unmistakably human. You've been warned, it said, the tone mocking. Cooperate, or suffer consequences. I jumped, heart pounding. Liam's jaw clenched. They're testing us, he growled. They know we're here. I glanced toward the door, half expecting it to slam shut on its own. Instead, the locks clicked, securing us inside tighter than before. My fingers traced the cold metal, a prison disguised as comfort. We can't stay here, Liam said, voice sharp now. They have cameras everywhere. I don't know if they're watching us, but if they are, we'll have to make a move without drawing attention. What do we do? I asked, panic rising. The back door's locked too. The system's in full lockdown. Liam's eyes darted around the room. I have a plan. But it means going through the server room down in the basement. That's where the main hub is. If I can get access there, I might be able to isolate their control signal and cut it off. The basement. Just the thought sent a shiver down my spine. It was dark, cramped, and full of cables snaking like veins through the walls. The perfect place for a trap. Are you sure? I asked, my voice barely steady. It feels like a death sentence. He gave me a grim smile. It's our best shot. Either we try or we're stuck here until they decide what to do with us. I nodded, swallowing my fear. Okay. Let's do it. We moved cautiously, Liam leading the way as the owls seemed to turn against us. Every step triggered a new assault, a burst of freezing air from the vents, lights flickering wildly, screens flashing distorted images meant to disorient. The smart home had become an enemy, a living, breathing entity controlled by unseen hands. Halfway to the basement door, the voice returned, louder this time, more insistent. You cannot escape. The code belongs to us. I felt Liam stiffen beside me. They're trying to intimidate us. The basement door loomed ahead, heavy and unwelcoming. Liam pulled out a small device, a kind of signal jammer, and pressed it against the keypad. A few tense seconds later, the lock clicked open. The stairs groaned beneath our weight as we descended, the air growing colder, damp, thick with a metallic scent. The faint hum of servers filled the cramped space, blinking lights casting eerie patterns on the walls. Liam moved swiftly to the main unit, fingers flying over the controls. This is it, he muttered. Once I isolate their signal, I can try to sever the connection. I stood guard, eyes scanning the dim corners, every muscle coiled tight. The house was silent now, but that silence was worse than noise, an ominous pause before the storm. Suddenly, the emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in harsh red. The voice returned, distorted and angry. Stop. Now. Liam's fingers hesitated, then doubled down. Almost there. A sudden crash echoed from upstairs, the sound of glass breaking. My heart leapt into my throat. They're coming, I whispered. Liam's eyes met mine, fierce and resolute. We finish this, or we're done for. He hit the final command. The server shuddered, the lights flickered violently, and then everything went black. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a single line of text glowed on the screen, "Welcome home." And beneath it, a live video feed, the front door, slowly opening, not from the inside, but from someone else's hand. I wasn't alone anymore. They were inside. A shadow stepped through the threshold, silhouette sharp against the dim hallway light. My breath caught as Liam reached for my arm, whispering, "Stay calm. We control the next move." The screen blinked again. The shadow paused just inside the doorway, a silent silhouette framed by the faint hallway light. We were no longer prisoners of the house. They had crossed the threshold. But the victory felt hollow, the air heavy with something darker than fear, uncertainty. How long had this been going on? How long had I been trapped in a theater of someone else's cruel design? The smart home that once promised ease and comfort had become a cage, and now the cage was open. The question was, would I ever be free? We didn't move immediately. Liam's eyes flicked to the basement door, then back to the front hall. "They're here," he said quietly, voice tight with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. "But they don't know we've severed the connection. They think they still control the house." I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. "So we use that." The plan was simple but risky. Keep the intruder inside, isolated, while we called the police. I grabbed my phone, but the screen was black. No signal. The owls had gobbled it up, or the hacker had severed it earlier. "Cell dead," I said, frustration twisting my stomach. "We need landline." Down the hall, Liam pointed toward the living room. "There's a backup line there." We moved cautiously, every creak and whisper of the owls amplified in the suffocating silence. The smart system's voice was gone, the devices inert, as if the hacker had pulled back, waiting. The front door remained open but unmoving, an unspoken challenge. In the living room, I found the old rotary phone, its cord tangled but intact. Liam lifted the receiver, listening for a dial tone. There it was, a faint, reassuring hum. 911, I said, voice steady despite the adrenaline crackling through me. "We're being held hostage." "Someone," I stopped. How to explain? The house itself had turned against me. The house was hacked. The attacker is inside. Please send help. The operator's voice was calm, professional. Stay on the line. Officers are en route. We hung up, though the sense of urgency didn't ebb. Liam moved to the window, peering out into the dark street. No sign of movement yet. I sank onto the couch, the weight of the night pressing down. My hands trembled, but there was a strange clarity now, a sense of control returning, fragile but real. The nightmare was far from over, but I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The house remained still, the silence a taut wire ready to snap. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed from the staircase. The shadow reappeared, closer now, a man in his late 30s with sharp eyes and a face I didn't recognize but had come to fear. He stopped at the foot of the stairs, voice low but confident. "You think you've won? I control this place. You're not free." Liam stood, his posture protective. "Not anymore. We cut your access. The police are coming." The man's lips twitched into a smile, cold and dismissive. "You don't understand. This isn't just about data. It's about power. Control. You invited me in a way. By hacking my life. By turning my home into a prison." I shot back. "You're a coward hiding behind wires." He stepped forward, the faint hum of a device in his hand betraying his intent. "Maybe. But you'll remember this night. Long after I'm gone." Before he could do anything, Liam lunged, knocking the device from his grasp. It skittered across the floor, sparks flying. The man cursed and turned to run, but the front door slammed shut behind him, locked. He was trapped. "Police," Liam said, moving to block the exit. "You're done." The man's face twisted in frustration, then resignation. "You think this ends with me? There are others. Always others." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, a promise of salvation. When the officers arrived, they moved quickly, cuffing the man and escorting him out of my home. I watched from the doorway, the night air cool against my flushed skin. Liam stood beside me, exhausted but alive. The house was silent again, its devices dormant, its voice stilled. The smart home that had betrayed me was just a machine once more. In the days that followed, I grappled with what had happened. The police investigation revealed the man was part of a cybercrime ring specializing in smart home takeovers. His goal had been control, domination, not just data theft but psychological torment. I felt a mixture of relief and lingering unease. The house was safe, but I was not the same. The sanctuary I had built was shattered, replaced by a wary vigilance. Liam and I grew closer through the ordeal. The crisis had stripped away pretense, revealing a bond forged in shared fear and determination. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to lean on someone else. One evening, weeks later, I sat in the living room, the old rotary phone beside me, a reminder of how fragile our illusions of security can be. The house hummed quietly, obedient once more, but I knew better than to trust it completely. Yet, in the quiet, I found a strange kind of peace. I had survived the darkness, human, flawed, and unbreakable. I was free. But freedom, I realized, was not the absence of fear. It was the courage to face it. And that was enough. Story 4, Silent Pursuit, Footsteps That Follow. I had always thought the woods a place of quiet refuge, a pocket of calm carved out from the relentless noise of the city. I was alone by choice. I needed the solitude. Work had been a grind all week, and the idea of walking for hours, lost in the rhythm of my own footsteps and the pulse of the forest, was my version of therapy. The trail was well-worn, nothing wild or dangerous, just a narrow ribbon winding through towering firs and maples, their leaves whispering overhead in the slight breeze. Sunlight filtered in patches through the canopy, dappling the mossy ground with spots of gold. I was halfway through my pack of trail mix when I first noticed it, the sound of footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was a hiker catching up. Not unusual. The forest was popular enough on weekends that I sometimes ran into others, though today was a Tuesday, and the trail had been deserted since I started. But the footsteps weren't just nearby, they were perfectly synchronized with mine. Every step I took was met with a matching tap, tap, tap somewhere behind me. I paused to check my watch and looked back over my shoulder, expecting to see a fellow hiker or perhaps a jogger. Nothing. Just the thick woods, the low hum of the wind in the branches, and the faint rustle of leaves. I shrugged it off and kept moving. Maybe an animal? But the sound was too deliberate, too human. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was a trick of the mind, a leftover echo of my own steps, or the uneven ground making strange noises. The trail curved gently, and I kept my eyes fixed ahead, focusing on the crunch of gravel underfoot and the occasional chirp of a distant bird. Then I stopped. The footsteps didn't. They kept coming, steady and measured, pacing me exactly even when I was still. I held my breath and listened. There was no rustling of bushes, no snap of twigs, just footsteps, soft but distinct, perfectly matched to my own. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I glanced around, heart picking up pace. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their shadows deepening as the sun shifted behind clouds. I scanned the undergrowth, straining to catch a glimpse of movement, but the forest remained still, indifferent. I started walking again, slower this time, trying to test what I was hearing. The footsteps mirrored me, always just out of sight, threading between trees but never breaking cover. It was like whoever or whatever was back there had memorized my pace, my rhythm, and was deliberately matching it, staying close enough to be heard but far enough to remain unseen. I wanted to call out, to ask if someone was there, but my voice felt small and fragile in the fastness of the woods. Instead, I quickened my steps. The footsteps quickened too, never faltering, never giving me a chance to lose them. My pulse hammered in my ears, loud enough to drown out everything else. I told myself it was probably another hiker, maybe someone playing a prank, or just a coincidence. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. Who would follow a stranger in silence, matching every step without ever revealing themselves? My mind spun through every possible explanation, searching for something logical: lost hiker, park ranger, curious jogger, but none fit. The forest, which had felt like a sanctuary only moments before, suddenly seemed like a trap, a labyrinth designed to swallow me whole. I stopped again, this time crouching behind a thick alder bush, hoping to catch sight of whoever was stalking me. The footsteps stopped too, as if waiting. Silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. I held my breath, my skin prickling with cold sweat. Then, a twig snapped somewhere to my left, and I whipped my head around. Nothing. I stood up slowly, muscles tense, ready to run, but also afraid that moving might lure whoever was out there closer. The trail ahead curved sharply, disappearing into a thicket of brambles and fallen logs. The woods were growing darker now, the mist thickening into a low fog. I debated my next move. Turn back? Push forward? Either way, the footsteps had made one thing clear: I wasn't alone. A sudden rustle echoed behind me. I spun around, heart in my throat, but saw only the shifting leaves and a glimpse of something dark slipping between the trees. Just a shadow, maybe, but it was enough to confirm my suspicion. Someone was there. Someone who had been following me for God knows how long. I swallowed hard and took a step forward, the crunch of my boots sharper than before. I wasn't sure if I was walking towards safety or deeper into danger, but the forest had lost its quiet comfort. It had become a place where every sound, every movement, carried a threat. And the footsteps behind me hadn't stopped. Not once. I quickened my pace, heart hammering against my ribs, eyes darting between the gnarled trunks. The cold air bit at my skin, but I barely noticed. Ahead, a faint glimmer of moonlight broke through the canopy, promising a clearing, maybe even a way out. Yet with every step, the footsteps grew louder, closer, synchronized with my own. Panic surged, but I forced myself to stay calm. If I ran blindly, I'd only hand my pursuer the advantage. Instead, I slowed, crouching behind a thick oak, breath held tight, waiting for the shadow to reveal itself. The night air was cold and heavy, pressing down on me with the weight of every whispered sound. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to stand, inching my head out from behind the tree. Nothing stirred. No figure, no flicker of movement. Just the gentle sway of branches and the distant hoot of an owl. But I knew better than to trust the quiet. Whoever or whatever had been matching my steps was still here, still waiting. I glanced down at the trail. The dry leaves underfoot were undisturbed, save for my own prints and the faint, nearly indistinguishable impressions of another set lighter, perhaps from someone smaller or wearing softer shoes. I stared at them for a long moment, tracing the parallel line that had been there all along, like a shadow tethered to me. I swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to panic. I needed to think. I needed to figure out who was following me and why. The forest had grown darker, the fog thickening like a shroud. I debated my next move. Turning back felt like stepping into the jaws of the unknown, but pushing forward without a plan was equally reckless. I scanned the trees for anything that might help, something to use, or a place to hide. Then I noticed it, a scrap of fabric caught on a low-hanging branch, pale against the dark bark. I approached cautiously, my heart in my throat. It was a torn piece of a shirt, the kind someone might wear for a day hike, cotton, faded blue. I reached out and touched it lightly, the fibers rough against my fingers. It wasn't mine. My mind raced. Had my stalker dropped it intentionally? Or was it an accident, a trace left behind in their haste? Either way, it was proof. Someone had been here, close enough to brush against the branches. I stuffed the fabric into my pocket and moved on, keeping to the trail but staying close to the trees on either side. My eyes darted constantly, searching for any sign, footprints, broken twigs, anything that might give me an edge. The footsteps had stopped, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. Up ahead, the trail forked. To the left, the path sloped gently upward, disappearing into thicker woods. To the right, it dipped down toward what I thought might be a creek. The moonlight glimmered faintly off water, casting eerie reflections on the surrounding trees. I hesitated. Going up might give me better vantage points, but it could also lead me deeper into the unknown. The creek, on the other hand, might offer a chance to lose a follower. Water can drown out footsteps, and crossing it might break the trail. I decided on the creek. As I moved toward the fork, a sudden crack echoed from the right, closer than before. My heart slammed against my ribs. I froze, eyes wide, straining to see through the fog. Another snap, a sharp rustling, and then nothing. I swallowed hard and crouched behind a fallen log near the trail. The footsteps. They had started again. But this time, I could tell something was different. The rhythm was off, less precise, more erratic. Whoever was following me was no longer just mirroring my steps. They were searching, probing, testing. I debated calling out, but the forest swallowed sound whole, and I wasn't sure if making noise would help or hurt. Instead, I pulled out my phone, hoping for a signal. No luck. The screen showed no surface in cold, unyielding letters. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I forced it down. I needed to stay calm. I slipped off the trail and moved quietly through the underbrush, heading toward the creek. The ground was damp and slippery, but I kept my footing. The sound of running water grew louder until I broke through the last line of trees into a small clearing. The creek was narrow but fast-moving, the water dark and churning over smooth stones. Moonlight danced on the surface, the silence broken only by the rush of water. I scanned the edges, looking for a crossing point. Then I saw it, a narrow fallen tree bridging the creek, its bark slick with moss. I moved toward it cautiously, testing the first step. The log shifted slightly under my weight, but held. I inched across, eyes flicking back to the forest behind me. The footsteps had stopped again. For a moment, I dared to hope that I had lost whoever was following me. But as I reached the far bank and crouched down to peer into the darkness, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a flash of dark clothing slipping between the trees across the creek. My heart lurched. They were still there. Still watching. Still waiting. I scrambled up the bank and ducked behind a large boulder, trying to make myself as small and quiet as possible. The fog thickened, wrapping around me like a curtain. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, through the mist, I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving parallel to the creek, gliding between the trees. But this time, they weren't matching mine. They were searching. I realized then that I was no longer just being followed. I was being hunted. And whatever was out there wasn't going to stop until it found me. My heart pounded as I pressed against the cold bark, willing the shadows to swallow me whole. Every breath was shallow, every sound amplified in the eerie silence that followed. The fog thinned as dawn's pale fingers stretched over the forest, turning the dense black into a muted gray. I wanted to believe I had fooled whoever was out there, that I'd slipped through a crack in their awareness. But the truth was more pressing. I had no idea where to go next. The trail I'd followed was behind me, swallowed by the night, and ahead lay only uncertain woods and the faint promise of daylight. I swallowed hard, tasting the cold grit of fear in my mouth, and tried to think through the madness of the night. The stalker, if that's what they were, had matched my pace, mirrored my steps, and then deliberately hunted me when I tried to lose them. That was no accident. They knew these woods. They had prepared for this. There was no way to outrun someone who could anticipate my every move. As the fog lifted, I tried to piece together what I had seen. Dark clothing, quick movement, a shadow that never fully revealed itself. But then, something else occurred to me, the footprints. I had seen them earlier, the wet impressions in the mud, the way they sometimes faltered, sometimes pressed hard. Could I track them? Could I turn the tables? I shifted carefully, moving from behind the boulder to a patch of damp earth, scanning for prints. The moonlight had faded too much to see clearly, but the rising sun cast long shadows, and in those shadows, I caught the faint impressions, a set of footprints, deliberate and heavy, veering off parallel to the creek. Without thinking, I followed, stepping carefully through the soft earth, eyes fixed on the ground ahead. The forest was waking up around me, bird calls, the rustle of small animals beginning their day. But the air was still charged with something darker, something that made every step feel like a gamble. After 10 minutes, I stopped. The footprints led to a rough path, one I hadn't noticed before, carved into the underbrush like a secret vein through the forest's heart. It wasn't a trail marked on any map, but it was fresh. Someone had been here recently. I debated my next move. Following this path could lead me deeper into danger, or it could lead me to answers. I couldn't stay hidden forever, and I couldn't keep running in circles. My fingers tightened around the strap of my backpack. I had to move forward. The path twisted sharply, forcing me to crouch beneath low-hanging branches. The forest grew darker here, closing in until it felt like the trees themselves were watching. I caught movement ahead, a flash of fabric, quick and deliberate, disappearing behind a thick oak. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the stalker, at least, not immediately. There, crouched beside an uprooted tree, was a small campsite. A circle of stones, a smoldering fire pit, a few scattered belongings, a half-empty water bottle, a tattered jacket, a worn leather notebook. I crept closer, heart hammering. The notebook lay open, pages fluttering in the light breeze. I snatched it up, flipping through hastily scrawled entries. Names, dates, cryptic notes about the forest, about someone watching, about a shadow that moves like me. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just some random hunter. This was someone who had been here before, someone who knew the darkness I was fighting. Someone who had tried and failed to escape. I glanced around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. The trail behind me seemed empty, but the forest's silence was deceptive. I could feel eyes on me, waiting. I forced myself to read on. One entry stood out. They're close. I can hear them breathing just beyond the trees. It's like they know my every thought, my every step. I don't know how much longer I can last. If anyone finds this, run. Don't stop. Don't look back. My hands trembled. This notebook was a warning. A record of someone else's nightmare, the same nightmare I was living. And if they hadn't escaped, then neither would I. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed nearby. I spun around, heart in my throat, eyes searching the advancing shadows. A figure stepped from behind a tree, face hidden beneath a hood. Looking for me, The voice was low, calm, but edged with something cold and final. I backed away, clutching the notebook like a lifeline. "We could end this now," the figure said, stepping closer. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." But I wasn't ready. Not by a long shot. The forest seemed to close in, the circle tightening. Whatever this was, whatever nightmare had been set in motion, it wasn't over. And I was running out of time. Swallowing hard, I forced myself to meet the shadowy eyes beneath the hood. "Why are you here? What do you want from me?" My voice barely rose above a whisper, shaky but defiant. The figure paused, then slowly lowered the hood, revealing a face both familiar and hauntingly changed. "You know why," they said softly, regret flickering in their gaze. "The truth you hold is dangerous, not just for you, but for everyone. I came to offer a choice: walk away now, or see everything fall apart." My grip tightened on the notebook as the weight of their words settled. The forest held its breath, so did I. A cold silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves. The dawn crept through the canopy in thin, reluctant beams, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the undergrowth. I didn't want to walk away. I couldn't. Not after finding the warnings, not after hearing the footsteps that had haunted me for miles. But I knew now that this wasn't just some random stalker. This was personal. And they were playing a game I didn't understand. I tried to steady my breathing, to focus on the trail ahead. The forest no longer felt like a place of quiet refuge. It was a cage, closing in around me with every step. The notebook felt like a tether to sanity, but it also reminded me that I was running out of time. My boots crunched on the dry leaves as I pressed forward, eyes darting between the twisted trunks. The footsteps started again, soft, deliberate, perfectly mirroring mine. I stopped, heart pounding in my ears. So did the footsteps. I held my breath and took a step back. The footsteps retreated, then resumed with mine while I moved forward again. The game was clear. They wanted me to know they were there, but not enough to be caught. I scanned the trees, looking for any hint of movement. Nothing. But I could feel the gaze, cold and unyielding, tracing every motion. I needed a plan. I remembered a small stream not far off the path, a place where the sound of running water might mask footsteps. If I could reach it, maybe I could lose them, or at least confuse whoever was trailing me. I broke into a cautious run, the notebook wrapped tightly under my arm. The forest blurred around me, a dizzying maze of greens and browns. The footsteps kept pace, steady and unrelenting. When I reached the stream, the sound of water rushing over stones was a balm. I paused on the bank, listening. The footsteps stopped again, this time a few paces behind, hesitant. I glanced over my shoulder and caught a glimpse of movement, a flash of dark fabric slipping behind a tree. My throat tightened. This wasn't just a stalker anymore. This was a hunter. I pulled out my phone, but no signal. Of course. The forest had swallowed any chance of calling for help. I had to confront this. Running was no longer an option. The notebook had brought me here for a reason, to face whatever had been stalking the previous victim and now me. I took a deep breath and called out, my voice steady despite the fear twisting my gut. "I know you're there. Show yourself." Silence. Then, a slow, deliberate clap echoed from the opposite bank. "Very brave," the voice said, low and mocking. A figure stepped into view, the hood pushed back to reveal a face I recognized, the same face from last night, but now etched with something sharper, more dangerous. "You shouldn't have come back," they said, eyes glittering. "You don't understand what you found." "I want to understand," I said, gripping the notebook tighter. "Why are you doing this? What do you want?" The figure smiled, a cold, humorless twist of lips. To protect a secret. One that could destroy everything if it got out. And what if I don't stop? I asked, voice rising. Then you become part of the forest, they said, stepping closer, eyes darkening. Like the others. The air thickened with menace. I realized then that this wasn't just a game or a threat. This was a warning from someone who had already crossed a line. I backed away slowly, mind racing for a way out. The stream was behind me, the forest closing in front. My pulse hammered in my ears as the figure advanced. Then, without warning, a sharp crack split the air, not from the stalker, but from deeper in the woods. Both of us froze. The figure's eyes flicked toward the sound, tension snapping in their posture. "You're not alone," they hissed. Before I could react, another presence emerged from the shadows, a second figure, this one taller, broader, moving with a cold purpose. Fear surged through me like ice. The forest had secrets I wasn't ready to uncover, and now they were closing in from all sides. The notebook burned in my hand, a fragile thread between the past and the nightmare unfolding before me. And in that moment, I knew this was far from over. The taller figure stepped forward, the dim moonlight catching the sharp angles of their face. Their eyes glinted with something unreadable, an ancient warning, perhaps, or a challenge. The air around them seemed to thicken, the very shadows twisting at their command. I swallowed hard, clutching the notebook tighter as if it could shield me from what was coming. "My name," the first whispered, voice like dry leaves scraping over stone, "is only the beginning." The taller one said nothing, but the weight of their silence pressed down like a stone on my chest. I wanted to run, to disappear into the thicket and lose myself among the tangled branches, but my feet felt nailed to the earth. The forest seemed to hold its breath with me, expectant and watchful. Then, a low, guttural sound broke through the stillness, a warning. I glanced down and saw the notebook pages fluttering wildly despite the absence of wind. Symbols I hadn't noticed before flickered faintly on the paper, sigils, drawn with a frantic hand, glowing just enough to cast eerie light on my skin. The two figures moved closer, their steps measured but relentless. "This isn't about you," the first said, voice softer now, almost regretful. "It's about what you carry, what you've uncovered." My heart hammered. I realized then that the notebook wasn't just a relic, it was a key. And they were the guardians, or perhaps the jailers, of the secrets it contained. Suddenly, from deeper within the woods, a piercing whistle sliced through the night air. Both figures froze, heads snapping toward the sound. The tension shattered like glass. A third presence was coming, and this time, I hoped it was on my side. The whistle shattered the night like a cracked bell, sharp and unexpected. I stood alone, the notebook heavy in my hands, its strange symbols dimming as if the forest had released its grip on them. My breath came in uneven gasps, the cold night air sharp in my lungs. The whistle came again, this time closer, more deliberate, a lifeline or a summons. I didn't hesitate. From behind a nearby thicket, a figure emerged, crouching low, their face obscured by a hood but unmistakably human. Relief washed over me, sudden and profound. "Are you okay?" The voice was low, steady, and real. I nodded, though my voice caught in my throat. Someone was following me. Two of them. I don't know who they are. My fingers tightened around the notebook. I said, "this is why." The newcomer glanced at the book, then back at me, eyes sharp beneath the hood. "You shouldn't have that. It's dangerous." "Dangerous is an understatement," I murmured. "They said I'm carrying something bigger than me. That notebook, it's not just a diary. It's a key, or a map. I don't know. But they wanted it back. Or maybe they wanted me gone." The figure nodded slowly, then crouched beside me. I'm part of a group. We've been tracking those two for a while now. They're not what you think, not guardians, but hunters. They protect secrets, yes, but by silencing anyone who gets too close. A cold thrill ran down my spine. Why? What's in the notebook? The answer didn't come easily. The figure hesitated, eyes flicking toward the dark forest. It contains names, connections, evidence of things some would kill to keep hidden. We've been trying to expose them, but they're smart, always one step ahead. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that. And me? What now? Now, the figure said, standing, you come with us. We'll get you somewhere safe. And we'll figure out what to do with this. They gestured toward the notebook. But it's not just about staying alive. It's about what you do next. The forest around us seemed to exhale a slow, hesitant release after the tension of the night. I glanced back toward the shadows where the two had disappeared, the chill of their presence still lingering. But for the first time, I felt a thread of control weaving through the fear. We moved quickly, slipping through the undergrowth, the path uncertain but our purpose clear. As we walked, I realized how much I had changed in the past hours, how a simple hike had become a crucible, burning away my naivety and leaving something sharper behind. That night, safe in a cabin far from the forest's edge, I finally allowed myself to look at the notebook without fear. The symbols still held their eerie glow under the lamplight, but now they felt less like a curse and more like a challenge. The figure, whose name I learned was Mara, sat across from me. You're not alone, she said quietly. And you won't be. But this fight, it's going to change everything. I nodded, the enormity settling in. The forest had tried to swallow me whole, but I had come out the other side, not unscathed, but unbroken. The footsteps that once mirrored mine in the shadows now felt like echoes of a past I was ready to face. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with tentative light, I closed the notebook gently. The nightmare was far from over, but for the first time, I saw a path forward, a way to turn fear into purpose, to reclaim the story that had nearly silenced me. And I was ready to follow it, step by careful step. The room around me was still, save for the soft hum of the city awakening beyond the window pane. I let the silence settle, a fragile companion in the early morning hours. Each breath felt like a small victory, a reminder that I was still here, still fighting. The weight of the past no longer seemed to press down with crushing inevitability. Instead, it felt like a challenge, one I could meet with steady hands and a clearer heart. I reached for my pen, the familiar coolness grounding me. Words had always been my refuge, a place where chaos could be shaped into meaning. Today, they felt different, not just an escape, but a tool for reconstruction. I began to write again, fluid and unguarded, as if setting down the story outside myself could help carve a path through the lingering darkness. Outside, the world began to stir, car engines, distant laughter, the clatter of footsteps hurrying toward their daily rhythms. Life moved on, indifferent to the battles waged in quiet rooms and solitary minds. Yet in that indifference, I found a strange kind of hope. If the world kept turning, perhaps so could I, in my own way, on my own terms. The notebook grew heavier with each sentence, a testament to resilience and the determination to be heard. I was no longer a passive witness to my own unfolding, but an active participant, weaving threads of courage into the fabric of my days. The scars remained etched deep, but they were no longer chains, they were marks of survival, badges of a journey endured. As the sun climbed higher, casting its warmth over everything it touched, I felt a quiet surge of strength. There was no promise of an easy path, there never had been, but there was promise nonetheless. A promise that every step taken in honesty and courage brought me closer to reclaiming the life that had once seemed so fragile. I closed the notebook again, this time with a sense of completion rather than hesitation. The story was far from finished, but its voice was no longer trembling in fear. It was steady, resolute, a beacon in the shadows, guiding me forward. And as I stood to face the day, I knew that whatever lay ahead, I was ready. Ready to write the chapters not yet lived, ready to confront the echoes, and ready to be whole. Story 5, Lost on the Mountain Pass, Strangers at Nightfall. I had arrived at the mountain pass in the late afternoon, the sun dipping low enough to cast long shadows between the pines but still warm enough to keep the chill from settling in. The clearing I chose was small, nestled between a pair of rocky outcrops that jutted out like ancient sentinels. I set up my tent near the edge of the tree line, where the ground was flat and dry. The air smelled sharply of pine resin and damp earth, a scent that always made me feel grounded, like I had stepped out of time for a while. I liked the solitude. It gave me space to think, to breathe. After pitching the tent, I gathered some firewood. The dry twigs and branches crackled quickly once lit, and I sat close, warming my hands as dusk deepened into night. I cooked a simple meal, dehydrated chili rehydrated with water from my filter, and ate slowly, savoring the quiet. There was a comforting rhythm to the night's sounds, the occasional rustle of small animals, the whistle of the wind weaving through the branches. By the time I settled into my sleeping bag, the sky was a blanket of stars, clearer than anything I'd seen back home. I lay still for a moment, listening, the crackling fire casting flickering shadows against the trees. It was the kind of night I'd imagined all summer, the kind that made the long drive and the solitary hike worthwhile. But then, something shifted. From somewhere beyond the clearing, a faint voice broke the night's calm. It was low and tentative, barely above a whisper, but unmistakably human. I sat up, heart thudding. I hadn't expected anyone else on this trail, especially not at night. The pass was notorious for being difficult to navigate after dark. Most hikers turned back well before sunset. "Hello?" I called out softly, trying to keep my voice steady. A figure stepped into the firelight, a man, mid-30s, wearing a heavy jacket and a backpack that looked well used. Behind him, another figure emerged, a woman, her face pale and eyes wide. They looked exhausted, their clothes muddied, as if they'd been on the move for hours. "We're lost," the man said, voice rough but controlled. "We've been trying to find the trailhead for hours, but keep circling back." I blinked, trying to process the sudden intrusion. This is a pretty isolated spot. "How long have you been out here?" "Since midday," the woman answered, swallowing hard. "We didn't mean to come this far. We thought we were following the right path." Something about their presence felt off. Their gear was too clean for people who'd been wandering lost all day, and yet their faces bore a kind of weariness that didn't quite match exhaustion. I scanned the shadows beyond the fire, half expecting to see others lurking unseen. "Have you seen anyone else?" I asked, trying to make sense of it. "Any other hikers?" The man shook his head. "No. Just us." I nodded slowly, torn between caution and the instinct to help. "You can stay by the fire. It's safer than wandering in the dark." They settled near the warmth, sitting awkwardly on the damp ground. I watched them, trying to ignore the creeping unease curling in my stomach. Then the woman spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "You must have been here a while. We've seen your camp from the trail earlier today." I frowned. "You saw my camp? How?" "The trail's nowhere near here." The man exchanged a glance with her, then said, "We took a detour off the main path. We thought we'd find a shortcut. Your tent was the only sign of life we came across." That's when I noticed something else. Their knowledge wasn't just about seeing the camp. They described the exact spot where I'd left my pack leaning against a tree, the way I'd arranged my firewood, even the small stack of books I'd brought along. "How do you know all that?" I asked, voice low. They looked at each other, then back at me. We've been around here for a while, the woman said, her eyes flickering uncertainly. Trying to get our bearings. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. Watching me. That was the only explanation. I forced a smile, though my heart pounded. Well, you're here now. Let's figure out a way out in the morning. They nodded, but their eyes never left me, and the fire's glow seemed suddenly fragile against the darkness pressing in from every side. As I lay back down later, staring up at the stars through the mesh of my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out here, not really. And that whatever brought them here, whatever they wanted, was only just beginning. Sleep refused to come. Every rustle outside made me tense, every shadow seemed to shift with intent. The cold seeped deeper into my bones, but it was nothing compared to the unease clawing at my mind. I tried to focus on the constellations, tracing familiar patterns, but even the stars felt distant, indifferent. Somewhere beyond the trees, a low, almost imperceptible sound echoed, a soft scraping, like nails against bark. My breath caught. Was it the wind? Or something else, waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal itself? I clenched my fists, knowing that dawn might bring answers, or only more questions. The night held its secrets tight, refusing to yield to my restless thoughts. Morning came slow and gray, the sky choked with low clouds that muffled the light and made the whole mountain pass feel damp and hollow. I forced myself out of the tent, trying to shake the fog of exhaustion and the gnawing tension that had settled in my gut overnight. The air smelled of wet pine and earth, and somewhere nearby, a stream gurgled faintly. I gathered some wood, trying to build the fire back to life, but my hands trembled just enough to make it difficult. The woman caught my eye, then nodded toward the smoldering embers. We should get some water, I said, keeping my voice steady. Before we plan anything. The man stood and stretched, limping slightly as he moved. There's a spring about a quarter-mile east, he said. We can refill our bottles there. I hesitated, watching them. They looked tired, but the way they moved, too coordinated, too deliberate, made me uneasy. Still, I needed answers. If they truly were lost, I had to understand how and why they'd been watching me. We set off together, the forest thick around us with fresh green leaves and the scent of moss. The woman walked ahead, scanning the trees, while the man stayed close to me. The path was faint, barely a trace through the underbrush, but after a few minutes, the sound of water grew louder until we reached a small pool fed by a trickling spring. The water was clear and cold, and I bent to fill my bottle, watching their reflections ripple alongside mine. As we stood there, the man spoke quietly. You're alone out here, right? No one else coming? I nodded. Yes. I planned it that way. He glanced over his shoulder, then back. We've been out here for a while. A couple of days, maybe more. Trying to find the main trail. The woman's voice cut in, sharper this time. We didn't mean to scare you. We just got turned around. I studied them, looking for any sign of deception, but their faces were unreadable, lined with dirt and weariness. Yet the memory of their knowledge, the exact placement of my pack, the way I stacked my firewood, refused to loosen its grip on my mind. Why didn't you come out earlier? I asked. If you've been wandering these woods for days, why wait until after dark to find me? The woman shrugged, but her eyes flickered with something I couldn't place. We thought we could find the way ourselves. We didn't want to bother anyone. I swallowed hard. And watching my camp? How do you explain that? They exchanged a quick glance. The man's jaw tightened, but the woman finally said, we weren't just wandering. We were waiting. We saw you arrive. You set up your tent, made your fire. We thought maybe you'd know the way out. It felt like a punch to the stomach. They'd been watching me. Not by chance, but intentionally. The idea settled over me like a shadow, cold and unwelcome. We made our way back to camp in silence, the forest suddenly feeling more claustrophobic, the trees closing in tighter than before. Back at the fire, I took a closer look around the site, searching for anything new: footprints, broken branches, signs of someone else's presence. That's when I spotted it, a small, crumpled piece of paper tucked under a rock near the edge of the clearing. I picked it up carefully, unfolding it in the dull light. The handwriting was neat, precise. Don't trust the trail. They watch. Wait for night. My heart thudded hard. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone else had been here recently, someone who knew more than they were letting on. I looked back at the two hikers. Their faces were calm, but I could see the flicker of something behind their eyes: fear? Guilt? Or something darker? Who else has been here? I asked, voice low. They didn't answer at first. Then the woman said, "There's someone else. A group, maybe. We don't know their names. They stay just out of sight." I swallowed, the weight of the situation settling over me like a stone. I was no longer just a lone camper in the wilderness. I was a target, caught in a net I couldn't see. As the day wore on, the clouds thickened, and the forest grew quieter, as if holding its breath. I kept glancing over my shoulder, imagining shadows moving just beyond the trees, waiting. When night fell again, darker and colder than before, I lay awake, the small note clutched in my hand. The fire flickered low, and the two hikers slept fitfully nearby. Outside, something shifted just beyond the tree line, a faint crack of a twig, the soft rustle of leaves. I held my breath, knowing that whatever was out there, watching and waiting, was closer than ever. And this time, I wasn't sure there would be a dawn. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying with it a scent I couldn't place, something ancient and unsettling. My fingers tightened around the note, its edges damp with sweat. The shadows seemed to press inward, swallowing the small circle of light from the dying fire. A low, guttural sound broke the silence, not quite animal, not quite human, and it froze me in place. The others stirred, sensing the change, but still too weary to fully wake. I wanted to warn them, to tell them we were no longer alone, but the words caught in my throat as the darkness thickened, closing in. I woke to a sudden chill crawling down my spine, the fire reduced to a fragile bed of embers. The note was still clutched in my hand, the message etched into my memory: don't trust the trail. They watch. Wait for night. I had been turning it over in my mind all night, trying to make sense of the cryptic warning, but it only deepened the unease that had settled over us. The woman, whose name I learned was Mara, whispered, "We need to move. Staying here, it's not safe." Her voice was steady, but I could see the tension coiling in her jaw. I nodded, though a knot formed in my stomach. "Where do we go?" "The whole area feels watched." She hesitated, then said, "There's a side trail, not marked on most maps. It loops back toward the ridge, away from the main path. It's risky, but it might buy us some distance." The man, who introduced himself as Eli, pulled a small, battered compass from his jacket. "We'll need to navigate carefully. Whoever's out there knows these woods too well." I studied their faces in the flickering firelight. They weren't lying. Their knowledge of the terrain was too precise, too intimate. It was as if they had been here, living here, in shadows long before I arrived. As we packed up, Mara pulled out a folded map from her pack. The edges were worn, the ink faded, but the markings were detailed. She pointed to a curve in the trail, near a cluster of boulders. "This is where they watch from. We skirt around it." I traced the path with my finger, feeling a sudden dizziness. How do you know all this? Eli looked away, his eyes darkening. Because we've been running from them too. We thought getting here would mean safety. But they found us, Mara added softly. They always find us. The weight of their words settled around us. Whoever they weren't just watching, they were hunting. We moved quickly, the forest swallowing us in its cold embrace. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart pounding harder against my ribs. The moon was a sliver in the sky, offering little light to guide our way. I kept my eyes peeled, searching for any sign of movement beyond the trees. At one point, Eli stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. Listen. A low murmur drifted through the trees' voices, distant but unmistakable. Not the casual chatter of hikers, but something more deliberate, more calculated. They're close, Mara whispered, urgency sharpening her tone. We need to find shelter. Ahead, a rocky outcrop jutted from the hillside, its shadow stretching long across the ground. We slipped behind it, pressing our backs to the cool stone. The voices grew louder, closer, but the figures remained hidden in the darkness. I caught my breath and looked at Mara and Eli. Fear was etched into their faces, but beneath it lay something else, resolve. We can't keep running, Mara said quietly. We have to understand who they are. Why they're doing this. I nodded, the cold night air filling my lungs. The forest wasn't just a place of refuge anymore. It was a trap, and we were caught deep inside. Suddenly, a faint glow appeared beyond the trees, a flashlight beam, sweeping slowly, methodically. It paused just beyond our hiding spot, then moved on, as if searching for a trace we had left behind. I swallowed hard, the note burning in my pocket. The warning was clear, but now it wasn't just a message, it was a lifeline. We had to find out who was watching, and fast. Because if they caught us here, in the dark, there might be no escape at all. The beam flickered again, this time nearer, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the underbrush. Every snap of a twig underfoot echoed like a gunshot in the heavy silence. My heart hammered, and I could see the same tension mirrored in my companion's eyes. We need to move, I whispered, barely breathing. Stay low and follow me. We slipped out from our concealment, the cold night air biting through my thin jacket. The flashlight's beam swung away, but the pace of the searchers quickened, voices murmuring low, urgent, just out of sight. Whoever was out here knew the terrain, knew exactly where to look. Ahead, a narrow creek cut through the woods, its water barely visible in the moonlight. I led us toward it, hoping the sound of water might cover our movements. The damp earth was slippery underfoot, but it was better than being caught standing still. As we crouched by the water's edge, I pulled out the crumpled note again, tracing the letters with trembling fingers. The message hinted at someone on our side, a hidden ally maybe, but who? I glanced at my companion, who shook their head, equally puzzled but trusting. Do you think they left it for us? Or, is it a trap? They asked, voice low. I don't know, I admitted. But we can't afford to ignore it. Suddenly, a sharp crack shattered the night, the unmistakable sound of a branch breaking under heavy weight. The flashlight beam reappeared on the opposite bank, closer than before, illuminating the rough outline of a figure. Freeze, a commanding voice called out. I tensed, ready to bolt, but then a whisper hissed from behind me. Wait. Look. From the shadows stepped a man, his face half hidden by a hood, but his eyes alert and wary. In his hand, a small device blinked softly. We don't have much time, he said briskly. You were right to trust the note. Follow me if you want to live. Without waiting for a response, he turned and disappeared into the dark woods. We exchanged a quick glance, then followed, the thin thread of hope intertwining with the peril surrounding us. The chase was far from over, and the night still held its secrets tight. We stumbled through the underbrush, the man's hurried footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of pine needles and fallen leaves. "We don't have much time," he said again, his voice low but urgent. "They're close, and they're organized. Not just local hikers or lost campers. These people have been watching you for days, maybe weeks." I swallowed hard, the cold seeping through my jacket now less noticeable than the sudden surge of adrenaline. "Why? Why me? What do they want?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced back over his shoulder, scanning the shadows. "Because you found something you shouldn't have. Something they thought was buried. You stumbled into their territory, and now they want to make sure you don't leave it." My mind raced. I thought about the note, the cryptic message that had led us into this nocturnal maze. An ally? Or a lure? We reached a narrow, rocky trail that sloped steeply downward, the forest thinning as it opened onto a jagged ridge. The man paused, crouching behind a large boulder and motioning for us to do the same. From this vantage point, I could see faint lights flickering below, flashlights or lanterns moving through the trees like predatory eyes. "They're spreading out," he said. "If they catch you, they won't just scare you off. It'll end badly." I clenched my fists, the cold suddenly irrelevant compared to the fear tightening my chest. "Who are they?" He hesitated, then said, "Not everyone here is who they say they are. Some of them have been pretending to be lost hikers for days, watching your camp, tracking your movements. They want to find what you took and what you saw." What did I take? The pieces didn't fit. I hadn't taken anything, at least, nothing I knew of. The man's eyes darkened. "Exactly. You have something, even if you don't realize it. And they're willing to do anything to get it back." A twig snapped nearby. We all froze. The man's hand tightened on the device, and his jaw clenched so hard I thought it might crack. "Listen," he whispered. "We need to get down to the old ranger station. It's abandoned, but it has a radio. We can call for help, or at least buy time." I nodded, though every instinct screamed that this was a trap. Yet, staying here meant certain capture, or worse. As we moved down the trail, the night seemed to close in around us. The sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of an owl felt suddenly sinister, as if the very trees were watching. My companions stayed close, their eyes wide but resolute. We reached the ranger station, a dilapidated wooden structure half swallowed by creeping vines and moss. The door creaked as the man pushed it open, revealing a dark interior littered with debris. The stale air smelled of rot and disuse. Inside, he fumbled with a dusty radio, twisting knobs and pressing buttons. Static hissed, then a faint crackle. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on." Outside, the forest seemed unnaturally quiet. Too quiet. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us. I spun around, heart thundering. "Welcome back," a voice said from the shadows. "We've been waiting." From the darkness emerged two figures, their faces illuminated briefly by the faint glow of a flashlight. Their expressions were cold, calculating. The man with us cursed under his breath, stepping protectively in front of us. "You lied. You said you wanted to help." One of the newcomers smiled thinly. "We do. But first, we need to know what you've seen and what you've taken." My companion gripped my arm, eyes pleading. I swallowed my fear, realizing we were no longer just running from strangers, we were trapped in a game far more dangerous than I ever imagined. And the worst part? The people who claimed to be lost hikers weren't just watching. They had been inside my camp, inside my life, long before I ever set foot in this mountain pass. The radio crackled again, a voice breaking through the static. But it wasn't a call for help. It was a warning. Don't trust anyone. Not even your allies. The lights flickered, the room seemed to tilt, and the line between friend and foe blurred into a suffocating darkness. We were trapped. And the night was just beginning. The weight of those words settled over me like a shroud. Don't trust anyone. Not even your allies. The subtle venom in the message twisted through my thoughts, unraveling every certainty I'd clung to. I glanced around the dimly lit room, shadows stretching and warping against the cracked walls. Faces once familiar now seemed unreadable, their expressions carved from suspicion and fear. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, a restless spirit rattling the camp's skeletal remains. I reached for my pack, fingers brushing the cold metal of my knife, a small comfort in a place where trust was a scarce commodity. The others shifted uneasily. I could feel their eyes darting like trapped animals, searching for signs of betrayal. A faint noise caught my attention, a soft scrape near the entrance. My breath hitched as I tightened my grip on the knife. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside, silhouette blurred by the weak light. My heart hammered, every instinct screaming to brace for confrontation. But instead of hostility, the visitor's eyes held a strange urgency. Time's running out, they whispered, voice barely audible. You don't know what you're dealing with. Before I could respond, the radio sparked again, static swallowing the message before clarity emerged. Then, a final chilling phrase, they're closer than you think. The room seemed to grow colder, the darkness more oppressive. Outside, the night deepened, swallowing the camp whole. And somewhere out there, the watchers moved silently, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The first light was reluctant, filtering through ragged clouds like a promise half-kept. The radio lay beside me, its speaker cracked and useless, the last message is nothing but static now. I had torn through the threads of trust and deceit, unraveling a knot that had bound me tighter than I realized. The others, those strangers who had appeared out of nowhere claiming to be lost, had been watching me long before I arrived. They knew the pass, my routines, my fears. It was a trap, a slow tightening coil meant to suffocate any hope I had of escape. I had confronted them in the dark, beneath the sickly flicker of the dying lantern. Their eyes were cold, calculating. They spoke in riddles, half-truths woven with veiled threats. I'd sensed the danger, but not its full scope until that night. They weren't just lost hikers, they were predators in human skin, waiting for me to slip so they could close in. When the mysterious figure had slipped into the camp, the one who whispered warnings, I realized the line between friend and foe wasn't just blurred. It had vanished altogether. I had no allies, only enemies hidden behind familiar faces. But in the end, I survived. Barely. I looked down at my hands, trembling, scarred from the struggle. My knife lay abandoned nearby, its edge dulled by frantic swings and desperate parries. The fire I built last night was reduced to ash, its warmth extinguished like the fragile sense of safety I'd carried here. The others were gone. I hadn't seen them leave, but the faint tracks in the mud told their story, fading into the dense forest, silent and deliberate. Whether they planned to circle back or vanish for good, I couldn't say. But the space they left behind was a hollow victory. I was left with questions that would not settle, shadows that would not lift. I stood and began to pack what I could salvage, meager supplies, a half-empty water bottle, my battered journal. The mountain pass stretched before me, indifferent, as if nothing had disturbed its ancient solitude. Yet I knew better. Somewhere in the trees, I still watched. The wilderness had swallowed my fear and spat out something colder, harder. I wasn't the same person who'd arrived here days ago, eager for solitude and clarity. The mountain had stripped me bare, forced me to confront not just the danger outside but the fractures inside myself. I had trusted too easily, hoping for connection in a place built on isolation. That hope had almost destroyed me. As I trudged down the narrow trail, the weight of that lesson settled deep in my bones. Survival wasn't just about strength or skill, it was about vigilance, about reading the spaces between words and the silence between footsteps. It was about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. The forest thinned, the trees giving way to the jagged outline of the valley below. The world was waking up, birds calling, a breeze stirring the leaves, but I felt detached, a ghost moving through daylight. Still, there was a flicker of something else, something harder to name. Resolve. A quiet promise that I wouldn't be prey again. That I would carry the scars not as chains but as armor. Before I reached the main road, I paused and looked back once more. The mountain pass loomed behind me, beautiful and brutal, a place that had tested me in ways I never expected. I whispered a farewell, not just to the place but to the part of myself that had walked in naive and unprepared. Then I turned, stepping into the light, each footfall a steady beat against the earth. The night had been long, the darkness deep, but I was still here. Still breathing. Still fighting. And that was enough. The first rays of dawn stretched across the horizon, casting golden hues over the fields ahead. The chill of night gave way to a gentle warmth, and with it came a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in days. Every step forward seemed lighter, as if the weight I'd carried was slowly lifting. The silence around me was no longer oppressive but filled with quiet possibility. I kept walking, letting the rhythm of my footsteps guide me through the waking world. Birds began their morning chorus, a stark contrast to the eerie stillness of the mountain pass. It was as if life itself was urging me onward, reminding me that new beginnings were not just hopeful ideas but tangible realities waiting to be embraced. As I approached a small village nestled in the valley, the faint scent of smoke and fresh bread teased my senses. Windows opened, and faces appeared, curious but kind. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like an outsider. Maybe it was the exhaustion etched into my features, or perhaps the quiet confidence in my stride, but something about me spoke of survival, resilience. I found a bench near the village square and sank down, letting the warmth of the sun seep into my bones. Pulling my jacket tighter, I allowed myself a moment to breathe deeply, to absorb the peace that surrounded me. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the hardest part, the part where I confronted my deepest fears, was behind me. A child ran past, laughing, chasing after a dog that barked joyfully. Their carefree energy was infectious, and I felt a smile tug at the corners of my mouth. Life was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel, but it was also beautiful in its imperfection. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, the map I had clung to so desperately. I smoothed it out, tracing the next steps I needed to take. The path ahead was winding, filled with unknowns, but I was no longer the same person who had started this trek. I was stronger, wiser, tempered by trials that had threatened to break me but instead forged me anew. Standing, I tucked the map away and began walking toward the heart of the village, where the promise of shelter, warmth, and perhaps even companionship awaited. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I welcomed that uncertainty. It was a challenge, yes, but also an invitation to keep moving forward, to keep living, to keep fighting. And that was more than enough. Story 6, Silent Asylum Intruder, Haunting Presence Revealed. I had never been much for ghost stories or urban legends, but the asylum was different. I remember the day clearly. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with the threat of rain, and the wind pushed cold gusts through the cracked windows of my car as I parked near the rusted iron gates. The asylum sat atop a gentle hill, its red brick walls mottled with vines and peeling paint. The main building rose like a fortress, broken only by darkened windows and a sagging roof that seemed to buckle under decades of neglect. I slipped on my backpack, double-checked my camera and flashlight, and pushed the gate open with a reluctant creak. The lock had been cut cleanly, probably by someone else who'd been here before me, and that in itself felt like a small warning. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint metallic tang of rust. The floorboards groaned underfoot, and the smell of damp plaster mixed with the faint, lingering odor of something chemical cleaning agents long since dried up, or maybe something worse. I moved slowly through the lobby, my flashlight beam catching remnants of peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. There were signs of people, recent ones, cigarette butts crushed into the floor, empty soda cans tossed beneath a bench. I wasn't alone, though the place was deafeningly quiet. The only sounds were the steady drip of water somewhere deep in the building and the occasional scurry of rats or birds disturbed by my presence. I had read about the staff who worked here, doctors with questionable methods, nurses who disappeared without explanation, and patients who were left to languish in locked wards. But none of that felt immediate as I wandered past the nurse's station, where old charts and rusted keys lay scattered like forgotten relics. I took pictures, trying to capture the decay without sensationalizing it. I wasn't a thrill seeker, I was a documentarian. This place deserved to be remembered for the people who had been trapped inside, not for the myths that had grown around it. That's when I first noticed it, a faint sound, almost imperceptible over the creaking of the building. Like a whisper, or a low scrape against the floor. I froze, listening. My heart rate picked up, not from fear exactly, but from the sudden awareness that I might not be as alone as I thought. I called out softly, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice sounded too loud in the empty space. No answer. The sound stopped. I chalked it up to the wind or an animal and pressed on, heading toward the east wing where the patient rooms were. The walls there were stained with old water damage, and the air grew colder, the temperature dropping noticeably. I shivered and pulled my jacket tighter. As I passed the first room, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I didn't remember seeing it that way on the way in. I pushed it open carefully. Inside, the room was empty but for a rusted bed frame and a broken chair. The floor was littered with fragments of plaster and a thin layer of dust. I raised my flashlight to the corner and caught sight of something odd, a small, hastily scrawled note taped to the wall. The paper was yellowed, edges curled, but the ink looked fresh. I peeled it off and read, "They watch. They wait. Do not trust the quiet." My skin prickled. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate. This was no leftover from the asylum's official records. Someone had been here recently. Someone who wanted me to know I wasn't alone. I stuffed the note into my pocket and took a few more photos, my hands trembling slightly despite my efforts to steady them. The uneasy feeling I'd pushed aside earlier now sat heavy in my chest. I debated leaving, but something kept me rooted. Curiosity, or maybe stubbornness. I wasn't sure. Then, from somewhere deeper in the building, I heard it again, a soft shuffle, like footsteps, slow and deliberate. I swung my flashlight beam toward the source, heart pounding, but the long corridor stretched empty into darkness. "Hello?" I called again, voice firmer this time. No reply. Just silence. And the feeling that something, or someone, was watching me from the shadows. I knew then that this wasn't going to be just another abandoned building on my list. Westbrook had secrets, and it seemed determined to share them, with or without my consent. I took a cautious step forward, the beam of light cutting through the thick gloom. The air was colder here, heavy with the scent of damp wood and something metallic, old blood, maybe, or rust. My breath came out in small clouds, and I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep moving. The walls seemed to close in, their peeling wallpaper whispering forgotten stories. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered. Panic surged, but I slapped the side and it steadied. Ahead, a faint glimmer caught my eye, a small, cracked mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. Something was scrawled in the dust on its surface, barely visible. Don't trust the light. Goosebumps prickled my skin. Was it a warning? Or a trick? I shook my head, steadying my nerves. The truth lay deeper in this place, tangled in shadows and silence. Somewhere beyond that darkness was an answer, waiting. And I had to find it before the building decided to swallow me whole. Morning light filtered weakly through the grimy windows, casting a sickly yellow haze over the peeling walls of Westbrook. The asylum had settled into a deceptive quiet. No distant footsteps echoed now, no shuffling sounds whispered from the shadows, only my own breathing and the occasional drip of water somewhere deep within the walls. I knew better than to trust the silence. I pulled myself up, brushing dust from my jacket, and checked my phone. No signal. Not surprising. The place hadn't had a working line in decades. But the battery still held enough power for photos and notes, so I made sure to save everything meticulously. If something went wrong, someone outside needed a record. Yesterday's note lingered in my mind, don't trust the quiet. The thought twisted my stomach. It was a warning, yes, but from whom? And why leave it here for me? The handwriting was shaky, but the message was precise. Someone watched this place. Someone who wanted me to know. I decided to start at the nurse's station, a hub of activity back when Westbrook was alive. If a staff member had been hiding here, it made sense they might have left traces behind. I pulled open the heavy wooden door, its hinges protesting with a screech that echoed down the empty corridors. Inside, the air was thick with mold and something sour I couldn't quite place. Old coffee? Or something fouler? I swept my flashlight across the cluttered desk. Files lay scattered, their pages yellowed and curling. But mixed among the official documents, I found something else, a small, leather-bound journal, its cover cracked but still intact. I flipped it open carefully, the pages brittle beneath my fingers. The handwriting was hurried but precise, unlike the shaky note from before. The entries were dated, spanning months from the mid-1970s. I read a few aloud to myself, voice low in the stillness. Patient 47 has been restless. The voices grow louder. I fear the medications are failing. Must observe closely. Security has been tightened. The incident in Ward C cannot be repeated. No one must know. I think someone is still here after hours. I hear footsteps where none should be. The building hides its secrets well. My heart skipped. These weren't official records. This was personal, someone's private account. And it ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted. I tucked the journal under my arm and moved deeper into the asylum, following the narrow hallway toward the east wing. The floorboards creaked beneath each step, and the flashlight's beam wavered in the stale air. I passed rooms with shattered glass and rusted beds, their metal frames twisted like bones. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Then, near the end of the corridor, I noticed something I hadn't before, a faint scrawl in red, smeared across the peeling paint of a door frame. I crouched to read it, the words chilling me to the core. He watches. He waits. I swallowed hard and ran my fingers over the letters, sticky and fresh. Fresh. Someone had been here recently, just like yesterday's note had suggested. But how? The asylum was supposed to be sealed, abandoned, forgotten. A sudden noise startled me, a low, dragging sound coming from the room beyond the door. I hesitated, heart pounding. The old latch was rusted but gave way with a reluctant creak. Inside, the room was dark, filled with overturned furniture and broken equipment. The smell was sharp now, metallic and unmistakable. Blood. There were smears along the floor and walls, dark and drying. I followed the trail with wide eyes, the light trembling in my hand. It led to a small closet beneath the stairs, its door hanging open just enough to reveal darkness beyond. My breath caught. A cold sweat broke out along my spine. Someone had been injured here, or worse. I crouched at the closet entrance, shining the beam inside. The space was cramped and filthy, filled with discarded clothes and empty cans. But in the corner, I spotted something else, a bundle of cloth tied tightly with fraying rope. I reached in slowly, every nerve screaming to stop, but curiosity won. I pulled the bundle free and unfolded it carefully. Inside was a worn staff uniform, stained and torn, along with a faded name tag, Dr. Samuel Hargrove. The name hit me like a punch. Dr. Hargrove was the asylum's chief psychiatrist during its final years. The man rumored to have vanished without explanation after the hospital closed, whispered about in local legends as a madman who'd gone off the rails. Some said he'd been fired, others claimed he'd been institutionalized himself. But no one knew what truly happened to him. And now, it seemed, he or someone connected to him was still here. Watching. Waiting. I stuffed the uniform back into the closet and stepped away, heart hammering. The silence returned, heavier than before, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I needed answers. But I was beginning to realize that finding them might come at a cost I wasn't prepared to pay. As I turned to leave the room, my flashlight flickered again. This time, the beam caught something I hadn't noticed, a pair of eyes, reflecting faintly from the far corner. They disappeared instantly when I blinked. I wasn't alone. Not by a long shot. The morning light was weak, filtered through grimy windows smeared with years of neglect. I wasn't sure what I was chasing anymore. Answers? Closure? Or just a desperate hope that what I'd seen wasn't real? Across from me, Jenna tapped away at her laptop, brows furrowed. She hadn't said much since I dragged her into this mess, but her presence was a comfort, something solid in the swirl of uncertainty. "You seriously think Hargrove's still alive?" she asked quietly, not looking up. I shrugged, rubbing my temples. I don't know what to think. But those bloodstains, the uniform, the eyes. It's too much to be coincidence. Someone's living in there, or was until recently. Jenna finally met my gaze, her green eyes sharp beneath tired lids. "You're talking about a man who disappeared decades ago. Hidden inside a decaying asylum that's been off limits for years. What if it's just someone squatting, or a local trying to scare people off?" "It could be," I said. "But I don't believe that's all there is. The place feels alive somehow. Like it's breathing around us." She gave me a half smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You've been reading too many horror stories." Maybe I had. But I'd never felt more certain of anything in my life. I shoved the blood-stained uniform's name tag into my jacket pocket. It was a talisman now, a reminder that this was no longer just a story. This was real. Back at the asylum that afternoon, the air inside was colder than before, or maybe my nerves just made it feel that way. I had returned alone this time, after convincing Jenna to stay behind. She didn't want to risk it, not without more information. I respected that, but the pull was too strong. I moved carefully through the peeling corridors, flashlight cutting through shadows thicker than the night. The blood trail from the previous day had faded, but it had led me here for a reason. I followed the path to the east wing, where the walls bore the cruel scars of time, paint blistered, plaster crumbling, wires hanging like entrails. I paused outside what had once been the therapy rooms. The heavy door sagged on broken hinges, revealing a room littered with shattered glass and toppled chairs. And then I saw it, a crude symbol scratched into the wooden frame, a circle crossed by jagged lines. It was childish and frantic, like someone desperate to leave a message or a warning. My heart thudded. The handwriting beneath it was faint but legible. They watch. They wait. I fumbled for my phone and snapped a photo, the flash briefly illuminating the room before retreating into darkness. The words echoed in my mind. Who was they? And why was I so sure they weren't ghosts? The sound of footsteps snapped my head up. Slow, deliberate. Too heavy to be the wind or falling debris. I froze. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, a whisper barely audible, but unmistakably human. Leave. I swallowed hard, my breath catching in my throat. Who's there? I called, voice steadier than I felt. No answer. I edged toward the hallway, every nerve screaming to bolt. But something held me back, curiosity, stubbornness, or maybe a foolish need to prove I wasn't alone in this. Then I heard it again, closer this time. The scrape of metal against concrete. A faint shuffling sound, like someone dragging something heavy. I spun around, flashlight beam darting wildly. From the shadows near a service elevator, a figure emerged, thin, hunched, face obscured by shadow and a tangled mess of hair. My heart froze. Don't come any closer, the voice was hoarse, ragged. You don't know what you're getting into. I swallowed, trying to steady my shaking hands. Are you Dr. Hargrove? The figure hesitated, then shook its head slowly. No. But I knew him. I stayed. I'm all that's left. Why? The word escaped before I could stop it. The figure's eyes glinted with something I couldn't place. Pain? Madness? Both? Because this place doesn't forget. And neither do I. Before I could respond, the figure turned and disappeared down the elevator shaft, a dark silhouette swallowed by the abyss. I stood frozen, the echo of those words hanging in the stale air. I knew then that there was no turning back. The asylum's dark heart had been stirred, and whatever or whoever lived inside was watching me now. Outside, the sky was bruised with early dusk. I pocketed my phone, heart pounding, mind racing. I had stumbled into something far bigger than a forgotten building or a vanished doctor. It was a trap, one I was already caught in. And from the depths below, I could hear the faint scrape of metal on concrete again. The hunt had only just begun. Each step I took echoed through the hollow halls, shadows stretching like grasping fingers along cracked walls. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the building itself was breathing around me. I forced myself forward, every nerve screaming to flee, but curiosity rooted me in place. The faint scrape persisted, rhythmic and deliberate, drawing me deeper into the bowels of the asylum. Ahead, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a pale shape slipping behind a rusted door. I swallowed hard, knowing that whatever waited beyond was no longer just a legend whispered by locals. The scrape of metal on concrete chased me down the hallway, a slow, deliberate cadence that dragged my heartbeat along with it. I reached the door, breath ragged and shallow. It hung crooked on its hinges, the paint peeling in long, curling strips. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I pushed it open, the rusty metal scraping against the concrete floor with a harsh screech. The room beyond was cloaked in darkness, the beam of light slicing through the thick blackness to reveal a jumble of overturned furniture, scattered papers, and a thick layer of dust undisturbed except for a series of footprints leading toward a narrow stairwell set into the far wall. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of the silence pressing down on me, then took the stairs two at a time. The steps creaked underfoot, each one threatening to betray my presence. The scrape sounded again, louder now, metal dragging over concrete, accompanied by a low, guttural whisper I couldn't make out. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a long, narrow corridor that smelled of damp earth and rust. The walls were lined with old filing cabinets, many of them pried open, their contents strewn across the floor. Among the scattered papers, I spotted a faded photograph, a group of staff members, their faces stern and formal, standing in front of the asylum's main building. One man stood out, a gaunt figure with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce straight through the image. I recognized him immediately from a name scribbled on the back in shaky handwriting, 𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿. The name chilled me. The same 𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 I'd read about in the asylum's dark history, the staff member who had vanished decades ago after a series of brutal incidents. Officially, he was presumed dead, but rumors whispered he'd never left. The corridor ended in a heavy steel door, half rusted shut but not locked. I nudged it open, revealing a cramped maintenance room cluttered with tools, wires, and a large, makeshift cage in the corner. The scrape came again, now accompanied by a shuffling sound from within the shadows. "Elliot?" I called, voice steady despite the dread pooling in my stomach. A figure emerged, thin, battered, eyes wild and darting. His clothes hung off him like rags, and his skin was smeared with grime and dried blood. He moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, clutching a length of twisted metal pipe. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed, voice breaking with a mixture of rage and despair. "They don't want you here." "Who?" "The staff? The patients?" I asked, heart hammering as I took a cautious step back. He laughed, a harsh, broken sound that echoed off the walls. "No one left but me, and I'm the last guardian. This place holds secrets. Secrets worth dying for." Before I could respond, he lunged forward, the pipe swinging in a wild arc. I ducked just in time, the metal whistling past my ear and shattering an old glass panel. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled for the door, but Elliot was faster, blocking my path with a sudden shove that sent me crashing against the wall. "You think you can just walk in here and take what's mine?" His voice cracked with fury. "I've watched, waited, survived, while everyone else forgot." I forced myself to stay calm, scanning the room for anything I could use. My hand closed around a length of pipe lying on the floor. Elliot advanced, eyes blazing with madness. I swung the pipe, catching him off guard and forcing him back a step. "Listen," I said, voice low but firm. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want to understand. Why are you still here? What are you protecting?" He paused, breath ragged, and for a moment, the fury in his eyes flickered with something else, pain, maybe, or loneliness. "They said I was crazy. Locked me away. But they left me here, to rot. I'm the only one who remembers. The only one who cares." His voice cracked, and suddenly the menace in his posture shifted to desperation. I lowered the pipe slightly, trying to reach through the madness. "Maybe we can get you out," I offered. "To help." He shook his head violently. "Help? There is no help. Not for me. Not for this place." The scrape of metal returned, louder and closer, drawing both our attention. From the shadows, a soft clicking noise began, a series of deliberate taps, like someone counting or marking time. Elliot's eyes widened in terror. "They're coming," he whispered. "You shouldn't have stayed." Before I could ask who, the lights flickered briefly, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat before the flashlight beam caught the glint of something metallic moving just beyond the edge of the light. A second figure stepped forward, taller, broader, face obscured by a mask patched from torn fabric and rusted metal. I froze, heart pounding. Elliot's grip on the pipe tightened. "No more visitors," the newcomer said, voice low and threatening. "It's time to end this." The room seemed to close in around me, the weight of the asylum pressing down like a living thing. Trapped between two men who had long lost their grip on reality, I realized I was no longer just an intruder, I was prey. And whatever secrets this place held, I was about to become part of its darkest chapter. The pipe in my hand felt heavy, the air thick with menace. Outside, the sky was now fully dark, stars swallowed by the city's haze. And inside these crumbling walls, the hunt had truly begun. The cold metal pipe felt heavier than ever in my hands, the weight of it grounding me even as the walls seemed to close in tighter. I realized then how utterly alone I was, no backup, no way out except through these two men who had turned this asylum into their domain. But what struck me more was the sharp shift inside myself. The fear was still there, but now it was laced with something else. A resolve I hadn't known I had. "Wait," I said, voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. "You said you're the only one who remembers. The only one who cares. What if that's not true? What if I'm here because I want to remember too? To understand?" The masked man hesitated, just a fraction, before scoffing. "You want to understand? This place is dead. People like us, like him, are ghosts, forgotten by the world." Elliot glanced at the masked figure, then back at me. His eyes were wild, but in them I caught a flicker of something fragile, a hope, maybe, that I could be the one to break this cycle. "I won't leave," I said. "Not without knowing the truth. And not without helping you, both of you. You don't have to do this alone." For a heartbeat, the tension cracked. The masked man's rigid stance softened slightly, and Elliot's grip on the pipe slackened just enough to reveal the tremor in his hands. Then, without warning, the masked figure dropped his weapon, the clatter echoing through the empty hallway. He lifted the mask, revealing a face marked by years of neglect and bitterness, but also by exhaustion. "My name's Harris," he said quietly, voice rough. "I was a nurse here. Before it all fell apart." Elliot looked at Harris, then at me, his own face crumpling with something like relief. "I'm Elliot," he whispered. "I stayed because I couldn't leave. Not after what they did to the patients. And to me." The floodgates opened then. Harris and Elliot spoke in low, halting voices about what had happened, the cruel experiments, the cover-ups, the staff who vanished or turned a blind eye. They told me about the patients left to suffer, the isolation cells, the screams that never stopped even when the world outside moved on. I listened, the weight of their stories settling deep in my chest. I'd come here chasing a story, a thrill, but this was something else entirely. It was a reckoning with history, with pain, with the ghosts we carry inside us. Hours passed as we moved slowly through the asylum, Harris and Elliot pointing out places I had only glimpsed in shadows. The old records room, the treatment wing, the morgue where names were scratched away on rusted plaques. Each room held a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of truth buried beneath decades of silence. Finally, just before dawn, we reached the main entrance. The first light spilled weakly through the broken windows, casting long, pale shadows. I looked at them both, two men broken by the past, yet still clinging to something like hope. "I'm going to get help," I said. "This place can't stay buried anymore. People need to know what happened here." Elliot shook his head. "They won't listen. They never did." "Maybe," I admitted. "But I have to try. For you. For them." Harris nodded slowly. "You're braver than I am." I smiled, faint but real. "Maybe we need each other." We stepped outside together, the cold morning air biting against my skin. For the first time since I'd arrived, the asylum didn't feel like a trap. It was a wound, yes, still raw, still bleeding, but maybe now it could start to heal. In the weeks that followed, I worked with local historians and journalists to document Harris and Elliot's stories. Their voices, once silenced by fear and shame, found an audience. The city council agreed to fund a memorial for the patients who had suffered and died within those walls. Harris and Elliot, with cautious support, began to engage with mental health advocacy groups, channeling their pain into something meaningful. For me, the experience changed everything. I came to understand that horror isn't always the stuff of nightmares or shadows, it's the cruelty people inflict on one another and the silence that lets it fester. And it's also the courage it takes to shine a light into the darkest places, even when you're afraid. Late at night, when the world is quiet, I still think of the asylum, the weight of its history, the faces of those who never left. But I don't feel hunted anymore. I feel accountable. And maybe, just maybe, a little hopeful. Because sometimes, survival isn't just about escaping the darkness. It's about facing it and carrying its lessons forward. The asylum stands empty now, but not forgotten. And neither are the men who stayed behind, trapped by their pasts, but finally, somehow, finding a way out. The memories linger like shadows, but they no longer define me. Each step away from those crumbling walls has been a step toward understanding of pain, resilience, and the fragile line between despair and hope. I carry their stories with me, not as burdens, but as reminders that even in the deepest darkness, light can break through. And in that light, there is room to heal, to rebuild, and to begin again. The future remains unwritten, a blank canvas inviting courage, change, and new beginnings.